Hello, welcome to Jason the Old Millennial. My name is Jason, speaking of course in my basement in this great state of Kansas. And we're doing another history of rock and roll. This is part 3, covering psychedelic rock, hard rock, blues rock. It's kind of the genres. We're kind of going to cover what they are, what's the difference, and then who kind of was the big influences in those genres, and talking mostly like late 60s and even into the 70s kind of period. I would say we're going to cover a lot of that kind of stuff. Of course, I got my two guests, I guess, friends that have been with me on this journey. First, we got Nick from Townsend 505, proud Jets fan. Nick.
Speaking of that,
You got your bag.
I have my bag of shame right here. I'm not afraid to use it if we talk about the Jets.
You put that bag on, and Brier's gonna put the fox hat on, and then we'll have a party.
Sadly, Halloween's passed.
Then we got Bryer from Brier's Music Showcase, a kid with the tenacity to give you advice about music before he was born.
Something I was born to do.
How do you have the tenacity to talk about music before you're? No, I'm just kidding. Okay.
I'm a douche. What can I say?
Brier's such a jerk that I pretty much have him on my channel a lot.
How dare you make a YouTube channel talking about music that people have to click on to hear? That's what I say. Anyways.
It's my generation.
My generation. Talking about my generation here.
Well, technically, I talk about their generation, but who cares? Who's counting?
Talking about their generation. I wasn't alive when they were alive.
Yeah, it's of course we're talking about music none of us were around for, so we're kind of looking through retrospectively of music that we love to listen to, and I think we're okay with doing that. I think it's okay that we're doing that. I think we all are entitled to talk about stuff we like, but anyways, yeah. So it's talking about psychedelic rock and hard rock, blues rock. You throw in there because I feel like they all have some similarities to them, or there's some blues maybe into the hard and to the psychedelic has some blues into it maybe, and vice versa. So I think we kind of throw them kind of somewhat in together. But so I like to throw it to you, Bryer. Like, how would you describe psychedelic rock?
Yes, psychedelic rock. Of course, when you say psychedelic, it can only mean one thing: drugs. Because by this point, it gets like the mid '60s, and there's a change. The Vietnam War was going on by this point, and a lot of the young crowd were kind of starting to be disillusioned by this. So there's like pretty much all the youth at that point were like they wanted to find something. They wanted to find new ways to experience the world, and of course that kind of led into drugs. Marijuana was one of the big ones, but of course the number one drug used was LSD, which is a very strong hallucinogenic. So funny enough, this whole idea of LSD and this drug culture coming up actually started from an author and an ex-Harvard professor, is what I looked up. And it was mainly these two figures. The author's name was Ken Kesley. I hope I said that right. And the professor was Timothy Leary. Pretty much, and I think the whole idea was to take these drugs to unlock the doors of perception. Hey, the doors. I wonder if that's going to be a thing later. And they even had a slogan: "Turn on, tune in, and drop out."
Yeah.
And so but of course it's funny because LSD was originally, from what I also found out, was LSD was originally supposed to be like a cure for a migraine originally, right? Which is kind of ironic now. but it actually dates back to the 40s. Actually, doing my research on it, so it's been around for a while, but the 60s is when they really started to use it.
Yeah.
And of course now because all these psychedelic drugs are starting to become a big thing. A lot of this was starting to seep into a lot of the music, and I think one of the earliest examples of what we consider, psychedelic would be, to many people they cite the Byrds with their song 8 Miles High.
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
which is, of course, if you hear it, it just has this very hypnotic, very
Yeah.
trance kind of kind of puts you in a trance sort of thing when you hear it. And another big thing that kind of crept into the genre was the whole idea of incorporating Eastern spirituality and philosophy.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm sure, Jason, you'll talk about the Beatles, how they famously went to India for a while to be with this, learn more about this, learn about the philosophy and stuff like that. Yes, there we go. And so that was kind of like the big thing. That was kind of like a huge thing.
Yeah.
And so really psychedelic rock sort of started to branch out into like two different directions. Like it's either music that is supposed to make you feel like you're high, or
Yeah.
it can just make you, yeah, or it could either enhance the highness. So two ways to go about it,
So if you're on LSD, it's different. Like you listen to it differently, or
I guess. You hear sometimes people talk about, oh, you don't understand. You need to be high to listen to this stuff. That's probably what they mean.
yeah, you hear that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like this better if I was high. Yeah, I hear
Yeah.
that.
There you go. So yeah, again, it's like, again, musically, it's kind of, there's a lot of sitar influence. There's a lot of sitar use of it.
Yeah.
Kind of very different arrangements than your typical pop song. Yeah, it's just all this experimentation with different time signatures and modes, and just kind of just an interesting, very very interesting sort of music. It's a music that's, I don't know. It's kind of like you can't really exactly pinpoint the exact what makes it so different, but it's just a music that you just have to hear it, and you just gotta sit back, and then hopefully you don't need drugs to get it, uh, but yeah, and that's pretty much some of the history I have with the genre.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah, just go for it.
Yeah.
So you added the Eastern sounds, like that Eastern sounding music. Fun fact: the Yardbirds were the first to put that, even before the Beatles would have that
That's
song.
true.
Love
That's
You
true.
To
But I
with,
think the Birds were the one that actually got big.
yeah, like they were the first to have psychedelic music, but then like the Yardbirds were like the first to have like the Eastern influence
Really?
in music with Heartful of Soul.
Okay.
Actually, that was like the more famous Indian influence, but it even goes further back with the Kinks in '64 when they made a song called "See My Friends," which, of course, not many people know that song because it's not one of the bigger songs. But it's crazy how the Indian influence started even back in like '64, '65, and how like other artists, like of course the Beatles, are like the biggest examples of that because of George Harrison and all that. I just wanted to add that the Yardbirds were kind of the start of that too, of the Indian influence.
Okay. Interesting. And they're kind of more of a blues rock style band, but also dealing with some of that. Yeah.
Funny enough, well, I actually do want to talk about the Yardbirds psychedelic stuff when we.
Okay.
That's gonna be one of the ones I'm gonna talk about.
Okay. Yeah. So this is what I wrote down, Bryer and Nick. See what you think. Uh, Incorporates new electronic sound effects and recording techniques. Extended instrumental solos. So we're getting more solos are getting more intricate. I don't know, more complicated maybe during this period. More improvisation. Use of hallucinated drugs. That's what I put that down as. Guitars are heavier and harder sounding, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say during this period?
Yeah, a little bit.
There's a lot of use of feedback is a big kind of yeah. Also, again, I always think of when I think of psychedelic rock, I think of like a lot of experimentation kind of going on, like backward tapes, backward guitars, doing loops, synthesizers used. Yeah, that's what I got written down as kind of my keywords for psychedelic rock.
Yeah, psychedelic rock, it's like it doesn't sound like your normal rock and roll. You know, you have sitars, like you said, backwards guitars. Maybe they'll add reverb to the vocals and make it sound even
Yeah,
trippier.
yeah,
Uh,
that's
they'll, they'll weird sound effects. I mean,
yeah.
The first psychedelic band I'll be talking about when I get to it will be Jefferson Airplane. I'll have a bunch of examples of them going off the wall, but that's when I get to mine. But yeah, that's my idea of psychedelic rock.
Yeah, so it feels like it's a combination of uh, drug use, especially LSD. It seems like a component, and then to me, a lot of more experimentation. Plus, just and this is where it kind of ties in with hard rock a little bit, I think. Um, but Nick, I don't know if you want to have any kind of definition for what you think hard rock is.
Hard rock, it's like the guitars are heavier. For example, with Black Sabbath, to make them sound even heavier, Tony Iommi would purposely lower the tone of his guitar to sound heavier than he actually is. Well, actually, it makes it sound heavier, but it makes it sound like the guitar's heavier than it actually is. Meanwhile, he's just tuning his guitar down, and that became like a big thing for Black Sabbath. But yeah, to me, my definition of hard rock / metal, it's like harder, heavier drums, heavier bass playing, just heavy on everything. And if you're gonna make a hard rock song or a metal song, don't go light on anything. There's gonna be distortion for some cases. Not now, of course. They're not gonna put distortion to like the 80s when they do like
Oh, really?
later metal. But funny enough, Bryer brought it to our attention before. All metal music is just heavy, distorted surf music.
That's
Well,
right.
not well, mainly the black metal scene, but that's a completely different thing.
Yeah, which is crazy to me. But yeah, but like heavy music, just everything has to be heavy. Make everything as powerful as it could be. And the
Yeah,
Beatles did it with Helter Skelter.
Yeah.
yeah, you brought up a good point, but like sometimes hard rock and heavy metal often get intertwined. Sometimes you hear hard rock, some people say metal.
Yeah.
It gets confusing, but what I can gather is like the difference between hard rock and metal is that hard rock, it's kind of like what Nick has said. A lot more distortion, a lot more focus on chords for riffs and stuff like that. Again, like it's like the bigger drums and that big distorted bass. But the difference is that hard rock kind of stays in the more blues bass sort of sound,
Okay.
whereas but
Yeah.
metal tends to go other places that kind of goes beyond blues. So we'll get to metal later, but of course Metallica is not really that bluesy sounding compared. Yeah. But yeah, we'll go more in depth when we get to metal. But that's like the difference between the hard rock kind of sticks with the more blues roots for the most part, but then metal does other things besides it.
Would you say like I was just now thinking like the drums and the bass is kind of changing during this time period?
Oh
Like,
yeah, it's 100%. Like I feel like especially the drums, like we said, like the drums get a lot bigger sounding. They're definitely starting to be not quite as just keeping the beats sort of thing. Like it
I was
is
to keep the
going.
beat.
It's just really trying to hammer in itself. And same with the bass too. Of
Yeah.
course, the bass is starting to come out of its shell instead of just sticking to the
Yeah.
root note.
Yeah.
Like, of course, I'm sure we'll talk about the Who and stuff like that, or how John really revolutionized bass playing and made it more of a lead instrument than just being in the back so much. So yeah, both the rhythm section has definitely
Yeah.
have gone evolved a lot since then.
Yeah, just now thinking probably a big part of getting to harder rock
And
music.
actually, it's funny enough, like Ozzy Osbourne, even Ozzy Osbourne has said, like, in order for a good heavy song, it comes down to the rhythm section.
Yeah, because I have written down aggressive vocals, um, distorted electric guitars. I guess that's another thing I should have said, like distortion, feedback, stuff that's been used more now. Um, and I think about like it's interesting the experimentation of like the Kinks. They created the sound with "You Really Got Me," where the Davis like cut into the amplifier or something like that, and that caused like this distinct sound that you hear on that. You know, it made it sound different, and that was like a cool experimentation. Also with the Beatles, like "I Feel Fine," John accidentally uh, puts a guitar by amp and gets some feedback, and it's like, hey, let's try to put feedback in a song, and it kind of introduce that kind of stuff. So I think it's kind of interesting. I put heavy riffs. The hard rock, you're getting more heavier riffs, I guess, if that makes sense, and it's more repetitive, and the rhythm section is more driving force. Um, and I put screaming vocals as well at some point. So maybe that's more when you get more really hard, right? You get
Yeah.
more screaming maybe in the music.
Yeah, it screams more on the metal side.
That's I was gonna say that's probably more metal side of that part of the argument. Anyways, what would you say is the difference? How would you distinct psychedelic rock from hard rock? Like, how would you listen to a song and go, oh, or is it interchangeable? I don't know if it's interchangeable, or you can
I
say,
think they're
okay,
pretty different.
that's definitely hard.
Yeah, I think it's pretty different because hard rock's more traditional. Like it kind of is more conventional sounding. Like it's not as experimental. It's kind of more sticking with the traditional sounds of things. Well, psychedelic rock, it's definitely more, like we said, more experimental. Definitely tries to go uh, outside the conventions of what was considered popular at the time. So, and again, the rhythm section is just like the rhythm section with hard rock is a lot more simple, not as complex. Whereas psychedelic rock, it can be much more like they're going around the kit a lot more different time signatures are being used.
Yeah,
And even the guitars, like we said, in psychedelic, you have more backwards, more effects on the guitar, while on hard rock, it's more bare bones. It's just more about the aggression rather than experimentation. So to me, I think there's a pretty good difference. But some bands have incorporated both genres into both. Like we'll talk about a few examples that kind of fall in both. But it's pretty easy to decipher the two, at least for me.
yeah. I don't know. It's one of the weird things when I hear a song, I go, that's for some reason my brain can go, that's definitely psychedelic or something about that. I think it's the experimentation part of it. I guess that was my thought. You said exactly what I was thinking. I think the experimentation maybe differentiates it too, in a sense where you're like, okay, I think that's psychedelic because of the backward guitars or the weird sound effects they're throwing in, or all that stuff. Anyways, but um, and just to touch on blues rock because I don't think there's much to talk about except that I guess blues rock it's blues music, but just faster. I don't know,
And electrified more.
and electrified.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think of blues music. It's like,
Yeah.
he left me. I'm
Yeah.
really sad. That's blues music. Blues rock is like, ba 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 bum. Da 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 da. I don't know. It's like, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Steppenwolf, they were a big blues rock band
Yeah.
of their time.
And of course, England had a big blues rock boom. I think the person that spearheaded the most, and I'll probably pull him up real quick because he actually passed away recently, was John Mayall. Was probably
Uh,
one of the big spearheaders of the blues rock scene, and of course, would help spark the careers of many guitar players after him. Of course, Eric Clapton was one, Peter Green, and a lot of the members of Fleetwood Mac. He's definitely a big figure of the blues rock scene.
Yeah,
interesting.
John McVie and Mick Fleetwood were in that band,
Yeah,
Blues Breakers, and then when they left, they would form Fleetwood Mac, which would be the blues rock band. And then, of course, through many changes, they would get away from that blues rock. So just
Yeah.
to see where they started in '68.
Yeah, of course, you're talking about Yardbirds, with Eric Clapton, probably one of the, I don't know if he's one of the great early ones, but he's one that I think about as blues rock, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
He was like barely in Yardbirds. He was like
Right, barely
with
in
the
there.
short period. Then they made For Your Love, and he's like, I'm out of here. I'd say the
Yeah,
big
and
guitar
then,
that
and then, he,
group,
went- then he went and joined the Blues
yeah.
Breakers afterwards.
Right,
But the big member of the Yardbirds is Jeff Beck.
right.
Who's big influence. And then of course after the Yardbirds would disband, he would go on to do other things. But it's interesting to see two guitar players in such a short span get together. And of course, famously, Jimmy Page would join the Yardbirds towards the end of their lifespan, and then, well, the
And then,
rest is history.
and then they turned to another band all completely. uh, that's huge, anyways. Yeah. So okay, so that's pretty good. I think we got the. I thought that was a really good explanation of it. All right, so now we're going to kind of talk about some of the people that were big influences in these genres. I was going to start off. I wanted to, of course, talk about the Beatles. I talked about the Beatles and the British rock invasion, of course. We went through that part. And I stopped with Rubber Soul because I thought we'd get into more of this genre with their next album, which is Revolver. Into this album here. Amazing album from 1966. And yeah, if you like, it's so interesting when I think about like the Beatles going from the Hard Day's Night, which is, their influence was their first influences were what in the first episode we were discussing, the 1950s and rockabilly and R&B rock and music, and that was the Beatles' first influences when they first came out in the 60s. They were trying to do Chuck Berry and Elvis and all those great 50s that me and Bryer talked about in the first episode, whatever. And then, they came in and British rock invasion, whatever. And then they got influenced by Bob Dylan and the folk music and folk rock music with Rubber Soul was more kind of in that. So it's interesting how so even by Rubber Soul, their sound was changing a little bit. They sound a little more folk rock. And then you get to this album, and it just feels so much different to me, anyways. I mean, it has a little bit similar to maybe Rubber Soul. It's starting to get a little heavier rock and roll with Rubber Soul. I think there's definitely a very difference between Help and Rubber Soul, and both albums came out in 1965, which is crazy. And then the next year, at 66, I don't know. When you listen to this album, it's just like, wow. When you hear their very first song, Taxman, it's like, what? This is a new Beatles. I feel like, and it's funny going back because I would love to have been around at the time when this came out and been like, what is this? This is like totally different. This isn't the Hard Day's Night Beatles. This is a different Beatles. Now I just look at all the music, of course, retrospectively. But if I try to think about it, chronologically, what would it be like to listen to this album for the first time in '66 and be like, Taxman comes in with this heavy riff. Bum, bum, ba-da-dum, bum, bum. I mean, it's the heaviest riff the Beatles have ever done at that point. So you can definitely see the influence of like more, I'd say, harder rock music that they were influencing just with that first song, Taxman. And even that guitar solo, it's a shredding guitar solo. Like we've never heard that kind of guitar solo out of the Beatles, I don't think, up to that point. That was an awesome guitar solo. I mean, it's going. It's like, man, he's all over the fret. Like, I don't know how he's doing it. So yeah, even with Taxman, we're getting this much different type of sound, and even the guitars. And I think a lot of it, I was thinking, the Hard Day's Night, it was the Rickenbacker jangly guitar sound, and with even on the other ones, and the Byrds had that same Rickenbacker jangly guitar sound. That was kind of a popular sound, I think, for the folk rock genre era. And then we get to this time period, they changed guitars. They're not playing the Epiphone guitars. And it's just a different sound. And I think that kind of, changed that from the folk rock to more of this hard rock influence I think they had. Also, you really see a little bit of a psychedelic influence with more experimentation, of course, like we're talking about. Like even in I'm Only Sleeping, there's backward guitars in that, I don't know if that's a psychedelic song, but definitely we're doing more psychedelic stuff there.
Oh, definitely. That's definitely a psychedelic song.
Okay, I always consider it kind of psychedelic because of that. And then the big one is the last song, Tomorrow Never Knows. It's definitely the most psychedelic song they had done to that point. where I mean they're throwing everything out there. Like they really went at it. You know, like I always, if you heard that song, like if you're listening to She Loves You and then the very next song you listen to Tomorrow Never Knows, be like, this is a completely different band. Who is this? Like, or I can imagine someone being like, I love She Loves You. And then they get to this song and they're like, what is this? Like, it's like almost too much at once. Sometimes I wonder if someone's like, I can't handle this yet. Like, I still want the Beatles of the, you know, I think my mom. My mom likes early Beatles. She doesn't like later Beatles. She's kind of stuck with the early Beatles. Like, I like the early Beatles sound, but the later stuff, I don't know, just never went with it. But anyways, yeah, Tomorrow Never Knows. I mean, you got all this backward guitars, these good tape loops, these weird sounds in there that you go like these seagull sounds. They're speeding up. Also, I guess you say that you speed up sounds. Anyway, so they really throwing all that in here, all kinds of sound effects. It is a crazy song, but it's awesome because of that. But it's definitely their big influence at the time on psychedelic music. I think we really see it with this album through that song. And then I don't have Sgt. Pepper's, but that was the next album I was going to talk about. Is Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Definitely got some psychedelic, or I say psychedelic. It's not maybe as much. It definitely is with Lucy and the Sky with Diamonds, I should say. It's the big psychedelic song with that. You know, again, John was influenced by Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, so he was kind of making up this world where you got marmalade skies, and he's just making up all these weird lyrics, you know. That's kind of where you get some lyrically, it's a very psychedelic type song. Anyways, I think it's really cool. And obviously, John was doing LSD also at this point, so it all makes sense. And Lucy and Sky Diamonds spells LSD, so that was the whole thing as well with John, because he was a heavy drug user. But yeah, I don't know what else on that album kind of go. I don't know if Benefit of Mr. Kite has some experimentation in it. Maybe you can throw that in.
They like jam a bunch of circus noises together.
Yeah, so definitely do a lot there. Even A Day in the Life. I mean, the idea of doing the whole orchestra build-up and then having that middle part, and then there's some cool experimentation there as well. So you kind of throw that in there as well. Obviously, I recommend all these albums, of course.
Within You Without You is another big psychedelic song as well.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, even Love You Too, I guess I didn't talk about. It was kind of has a psychedelic feel to it. And then we just covered this album on Jacob's channel. I think this is the most psychedelic album they did. Magical Mystery Tour came out 67 as well. Yeah, we went through it all, and I was like, as I was listening, I was like, yeah, there's just so much experimentation on this album. Especially, I mean, the big one, of course, is I mean, that is definitely one of the most psychedelic songs they did. Where again, the lyrics make no sense. It's just stuff that John. It's funny. My dad always says, like, I don't get the lyrics, but I like it. I like that I don't get it. I always thought that was funny. He's like, yeah, I guess you don't need to get the lyrics all the time. Sometimes it's just fun just to listen to the lyrics and go, huh, that was interesting lyric. But you know, and they definitely were throwing the orchestra music was very psychedelic sounding, and they were throwing a lot of stuff in that song. It was very cool. But even like Flying Blue Jay Way has some psychedelic kind of sounds to it. Then the other big one I think you have to say is Strawberry Fields Forever has definitely got the psychedelic influence, and it was a huge song for them as well. With the with the different mellotron or whatever they're using, and yeah, all the different the sounds they're using for that as well. And that's definitely a song. Yeah, I can see if you're high, you'd really get into that song. Like, yeah, living my life with eyes closed, you know. That's profound or something. But yeah, so of course you just look at this cover, it's psychedelic. It just yells out psychedelic as well. Now I was just thinking, like, I guess you can go to the White Album with Helter Skelter, definitely the heaviest song that they ever did, but also one of the heaviest songs probably of that time. Like, I would say they're as heavy as anything Led Zeppelin or the Who were doing or whatever, you know. That was a heavy song, guitar wise, and even drums was really driving the song. So that's a really cool song to listen to and go, wow, that's 68, and it's like, wow, they've gotten real heavy music. But and there's other examples. You can go throughout the whole album, of course. With that, yeah, I would say the Beatles, they delved in different genres, but definitely they were a big influence early on, I think, with psychedelic music and even hard rock music early on. And that's not what they're mostly known for. I think other bands took that to a new level, but that's why I had to talk about the Beatles here. I think is a big influence in those genres, anyways. So then I'll pass on to Nick. What band do you want to talk about? And
Yeah, I'm gonna go with all my psychedelic bands first, and then I'll do the hard rock bands you gave me second. First psychedelic band I do want to talk about is the very influential San Francisco band Jefferson Airplane. So this is their first album. Jefferson Airplane takes off, and well, what's interesting about this debut album is that we don't get Grace Slick on this album. This is the only album where Grace Slick isn't on here.
mm-hmm.
Not because there's like no problems. It's just she wasn't in the band at the time. There's another girl right here called Anderson. The one right here, the third girl right here, girl right there, Anderson. So she was the original female vocalist of the band. Well, she's not a lead singer, but she's the original female of the band, and it's interesting looking back at that. But there's little bits of psychedelic music in here. Let Me In is gets a little psychedelic, but I consider this to be more of like a folk rock album. I just wanted to mention this because it's their debut, and I didn't get to talk about it last time. What's interesting about this album is that there's 3 different versions of this album. There's one version of this album where it's 12 songs long. There's 2 uncensored lyrics on one. There's one song that they had to take off completely because it's talking about taking trips, which is basically taking drugs. They're like,
You can't
RCA was like, we can't have songs talking about drugs. So the second and third edition, that song was removed altogether. It's called Running Around This World. I don't have that copy. This is the censored third edition of the album. Another thing on the original is that on Let Me In, there's a lyric, oh, let me in, you know where, pretty much a sex kind of thing. Like, oh, you know where you want me to let you, like, let me in, you know where, you could put one and one together. RCA was like, no, don't do that. And then there's another one on Run Around where it's like, where you lay under me.
Oh, really?
And then they had them change it to lay with me. So there were like a lot of problems where they were like, how about you censor some of these songs? And one of the songs they just told them that outright get rid of because they're like, just get rid of it. It's interesting that's like they're censored heavily on this album. And you'll know why after. Then there's the big one. Surrealistic Pillow. To me, easily the best album that they've made. This is in my top 100 albums list, really high on there too. They took the influences of their debut album, plus, of course, we have Grace Slick. Yay! She was in another band previously. She brought 2 songs that she had written for that band, but never recorded for them. You guys might have heard of it, called Somebody to Love and White Rabbit. So,
yeah, 2 best songs.
right away, her influence in this band. Right away, she's already proven herself to be a great addition to the band. You might be wondering, what happened to that other female vocalist? What happened to her? She quit the band. You might be wondering, what happened? Was it something wrong? Well, the band wasn't doing that well commercially, and she wanted to spend time with family because I think she had a family at this time, and she was more focused on that, so she quit the band. So that's when they went and got Grace Slick, which glad that happened because this is the best thing to happen to them. You start to get a little bit of psychedelia, especially with White Rabbit, where Grace writes about Alice in Wonderland, which that song is such a trip. Go ask Alice when she's 10 feet tall. Another one of my favorites. Of course, they have other psychedelic songs like Plastic Fantastic Lover. That song goes off the walls. It's the last song on the album. How Do You Feel and My Best Friend, those are like more Mamas and Papas influenced songs, because the Mamas and Papas were pretty big around this time in the States, which was pretty cool. There's nothing much more to add psychedelic wise, but to me, this is like the perfect blend between their psychedelic music and their folk music. So definitely check this out if you haven't already.
Yeah.
I would show you the third album, but I sadly don't own it. It's called After Bathing at Baxter's. This is the album cover right here. I'll lower the light so you can see it. That's the album cover, After Bathing at Baxter's. So Surrealistic Pillow, huge. White Rabbit, Somebody to Love. Those singles really boosted the album sales. Then they went on a huge drug haul, like LSD, acid. Like they went crazy with drugs on here. And what makes it even more crazy is that they didn't even have a producer, because they were like, well, they did have a producer, but it was kind of like you guys could do whatever you want now. Like before, they were restricting them, censoring them. Now it's like, do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. And After Bathing at Baxter's actually has a hidden meaning behind it. Baxter is a euphemism for acid, and bathing is tripping. So the album, technically, you could be called After Tripping on Acid, pretty much. So this is their this is their most psychedelic album to date.
Okay.
This is not for the faint of heart. Like, if you go into this album thinking you're going to get another Surrealistic Pillow, you're going to be extremely disappointed. This is their most psychedelic album. Ballad of You and Me and Poniel opens up with this heavy psychedelic guitar riff, and that's all goes crazy. Then the second song, Small Package of Value Will Come Shortly to You, or Come to You Shortly. It's just this minute and a half collage of different sound effects and collages, people screaming in the background. It's like a collage of just different sounds. I don't like this, but it's just a good showcase of how crazy that they went on drugs. Young Girl Sunday Blues was just it's weird. It's like a live performance, but it's actually a live performance. It's pretty good. Martha, kind of more into that psychedelic feel to it. Rejoice, Grace Slick, even more psychedelic than she did on the last album. There's another song called Spare Change where it's just this 9-minute instrumental of psychedelic madness. Again, I don't think either of you guys would like this or that. Anything on this album. Two Heads, even more. It's probably Grace Slick's most psychedelic song that she.
I think like there's too much experimentation. We might not like it because it's too experimental.
They really go off the wall on this album. Even I'm a big Airplane fan. Even when I first heard it, I'm like, this is the weirdest thing I've ever heard. Even and I've heard Sid Barrett, Pink Floyd before. Like, again, this is not for the faint of heart, this album. It really isn't. Won't You Try, Saturday Afternoon. That's like their 5-minute epic to close the album. This whole album is experimental, and it's to capture their live sound that they had at the time. This is it's weird. It's like one of my favorite Airplane albums, but it's an album that grew on me the most. Another album, their fourth album here that I own, Crown of Creation, continues their psychedelic sound. This is another far out there album. First song of the album, Lather, you have Grace Slick singing, and then there's like this part where this guy uses a nose whistle as like a psychedelic instrument. I'm like, it's so weird. I don't think either of you guys are gonna like either of these albums that I'm talking about right now, because it's just they go really.
I own that on CD.
You own this?
Yeah.
Did you listen to it?
I did. I forgot what I thought of it though.
I can't imagine you liking this. This is like another far out there album. In Time, pretty good song.
Cats.
What's that? Ooh, kitty cat.
He's home now.
Triad, which funny about this song was originally written by Crosby to go on the Notorious Bird Brother album, but then of course the Birds rejected that song from Crosby, and then Grace Slick was like, hey, I'll sing the song, and it became an iconic Jefferson Airplane song amongst Airplane fans. So that's actually one good thing that happened about that song not appearing on that album, the Birds album, I should say.
Yeah.
There's another song called I'll let you guys read it. It's track number 6 here.
Okay.
I don't know how to pronounce that, but pretty much it's a minute of, imagine FX by Black Sabbath, but make it 10 times creepier.
Oh no, FX.
Like 10 times creepier. Like imagine waking up to that. Like if you remember what it sounds like, right? Imagine waking up to like the middle of the night and someone watching you in the corner of your room. I don't care how tough anyone in this world is, you'd be shitting your pants. So didn't like that track at all. Even as a diehard Jefferson Airplane fan who loves After Being at Baxter's, I'm like, okay, guys, you're going too far on this one.
A little much.
If You Feel, really cool song. The House of Punil Corners. It's like the psychedelic song. I think there was parts of it where it tells them where they were actually recording this at the time, if I'm remembering correctly, but another essential album of theirs. One more album I do want to talk about by this band is Volunteers. This is the last album of the 60s, and this is the last album with the main 6 members of the band. This is the more protesty album because this is, Vietnam War was at its highest.
Yeah.
This is kind of like a mix between psychedelic rock and hard rock. It's like a turn of the album. Like there's songs that are psychedelic, and then there's songs that are more hard rock. We Could Be Together, definitely a hard rock song. And most notable about the song is that there's a lyric in the song that literally says, "Up against the wall, motherfucker."
Jeez.
Yes. That was a lyric on this song. I'm not going to repeat it, but that's a lyric on the song. And they allowed it. And you might be wondering,
yeah,
they didn't allow them to say the other stuff of the debut,
right.
But at this point, the band was like, well, there was another album that they let go with cursing, and Jefferson Airplane's like, hey, you let them curse and do all that. Now we're going to curse on our record. And RCA was like, whatever, do whatever you got to do.
I guess, censors weren't as big or strict.
Yeah. I mean, they literally said they literally dropped the F-bomb on that one.
Wow. Yeah.
And then there's another song called Eskimo Blue Day, sung by Grace Slick. And there were a couple of times where she said, doesn't mean shit to a tree. I'm like, there's like 2 songs with cursing on it, and they didn't do nothing about it. And again, like I said, they were like, we're going to curse and you're going to like it kind of way. They also do a version of Wooden Ships.
Mm-hmm.
This is my favorite version of the song. I love, they kind of put more of a psychedelic rock to it than the CSN version. What most people don't know is that Kantner, one of the lead guys of the band, he co-wrote it with Crosby and Stills. So people don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now you do know, whoever's watching and didn't know that at the time. My favorite song on the album is Volunteers, the title track, because Marty Ballin, which I'll show you what he looks like right here. He looked out his window one morning, and there was Volunteers of America, the protesting, and first thing he came to his mind is like, look what's happening on the streets. And then it just kind of wrote itself. Got a revolution, got a revolution. I mean, if you watched my video on my channel, me and Jason, this is my favorite single of '69 because of how kind of rebellious that song is. And this whole album just full of rebellious songs. And yeah, that's my final thing I want to say. Those are I'd say the 2 albums I recommend. would be Surrealistic Pillows and Volunteers. After Bathing at Baxter's and Crown of Creation, those two albums stay far away from them unless you really want to listen to some weird freaking music.
All right. If you're a hardcore psychedelic fan, I guess.
Yeah. If you're like a Syd Barrett Pink Floyd fan, go right ahead. You'll love those albums. But if you're like Jason and you don't really like that much psychedelic music, stay far away from those albums.
All right. Hey, Bryer, what do you got for us?
All right. Well, Nick kind of brought them up already, but might as well keep the train going with the psychedelic. We're going to some Pink Floyd. All right. So, of course, Pink Floyd, of course, nowadays are one of the most influential bands ever. But, of course, they got their starts in 1967 here. Of course, here we have their debut, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Of course, to most, for psychedelic rock, it's probably one of the big albums of the genre. Of course, Pink Floyd, the main figure of this band, of course, was Syd Barrett, who was basically the leader of the band at this point. Him and Roger Waters were great friends in school, and so they kind of got together and made a lot of music. Of course, they're also joined by Richard Wright on keyboards and Nick Mason on drums. And of course, Syd played guitar and Roger was on bass. So yeah, of course, Syd was always kind of the oddball. Even when they were young, he was always this very eccentric, very flamboyant, and also wore all these like flashy clothes and stuff like that, which is another big feature of psychedelic was also the fashion.
More
colorful, very frivolous stuff like that.
And Dan.
Yeah. Of course, Syd was all into that, and so the rest of the band were kind of got into it too. And yeah, they were big in the underground scene. Of course, Syd used LSD frequently. And the thing about the lyrics of Syd Barrett, Pink Floyd, of course, a lot of them are very nursery rhyme kind of themed. They have a very kind of cheery, very I don't know how you say it, but has this like upbeat kind of quirky,
whimsical,
yeah, that too, whimsy even, and yeah, a lot of the music and the stuff, these like long experimentation, a lot of these weird soundscapes they were playing around with. I mean, the first song, Astronomy Domine, kind of a very spacey, very heavy use of the keyboards and interesting sounds they got from this. And a lot of the guitar playing kind of has a heavy edge. It does use a bit of distortion. Like Lucifer Sam kind of has a more guitar driven riff to it. But then you have stuff like Interstellar Overdrive, which is this very long jam session, basically. Again, playing with different structures and stuff like that. And yeah, so of course, very, very strange album. But it is definitely an interesting listen, especially where Pink Floyd would later become this big tour de force. It's kind of interesting to hear where they got their start. And of course, sadly, Syd Barrett wouldn't really stick around for that long, because really not long after the album came out, his mental health declined tremendously due to the drug use, and potentially might have schizophrenia as well. But he was able to stick around for one more album. That was their second album, A Saucer Full of Secrets. But by this point, he really wasn't on that much. By this point, they realized just how messed up he was. Like, he would always show up late, or he would just come in and have this blank stare in his face. And they would try to play with him live, but there are times he would just play just one note the whole time, and so they had to basically mute him on stage. And of course, they had to bring in because of this, they had to bring in another guitar player. And of course, they brought in David Gilmour, who is here on the album. So this is the only time. Well, this is the only time everybody that's been in the band contributed. And yeah, and then they all tried to keep Sid around because he was such a big part and of the band, especially early on, that they didn't want to get rid of him. But eventually it all came to head with this infamous studio story of Sid coming up with a song called "Do You Get It?" And every time they start something, and then Sid would immediately change it to something else, and at the end of it, Sid would go like, "Did you get it?" And no one got what he was going with this. Eventually, Roger got fed up, like, okay, we can't do this anymore. So,
Yeah, I remember hearing an interview where he was like, he would keep changing it. It just got a couple takes, and I just like put my bass down. I'm like, I'm done.
yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah. So Sid kind of left after this album. He did get one more hurrah with the last song, Jug Band Blues, which pretty much kind of, in a way, kind of showcases his mental state and how he, even throughout all the drugs and meth he was under, he still was somewhat conscious of what was going on, that he was being phased out. So kind of a sad tale with Sid. It's a very tragic tale. But of course,
did he die?
No, he actually lived in like
Oh,
the
okay.
2000s.
Oh,
But
okay.
we'll get to that. We'll get more to him later.
Oh, okay.
And so after Sid's gone, and of course David Gilmour's in the band kind of went through a weird period where they really had no idea who they were anymore. They would still release albums. Of course, you have like Amagama, which is also one of their strangest albums, which each member gets a chance to contribute a song. I mean, it's both a live album and a studio album. Of course, when you get to the studio stuff, you have like each member gets a chance to have their own song. And there's the infamous song on here that is called, and I'm going to read it. Several species of small furry animals gathered together in a cave and grooving with a pit.
Yeah,
That's the
name of the song.
It's weird. Besides that track, I really like that album. I know most people consider that to be the worst album, but I don't know. I mean, again, you're talking to the same guy whose favorite or second favorite Jefferson Airplane album is After Bathing at Baxter. So take my take with a small grain of salt.
Yeah.
So is that the longest title of all time?
Probably one of them. But eventually they would slowly start to find their footing. Of course, another album they released was Adam Heart Mother, which still not quite finding their definitive sound yet, but it's getting closer. Of course, you have a nice cow in here.
I know, Dark Side of the Moon.
I know. Actually, I think it's the same people. Actually,
I love that album.
Yeah,
I love that album. I love that. Even I don't know if what you think about the 20-minute instrumental in the beginning of the album.
I mean, Adam Heart Mother's a good track. I remember liking. I remember liking this album. It's been a while since I've heard it, but I do remember liking it. But it's getting closer. But it still has that psychedelic feel. Like there's literally a song called Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast. So there you go. Enough said.
Marmalade. I remember this part of them where they're like marmalade, marmalade.
Yeah. Of course, we're starting to creep into the 70s now, and that's kind of when they finally found their stride, with that being metal, you pretty much have their sound starting to come to fruition. You have this instrumental beginning with One of These Days, which has a more heavy sound to it. It does use some feedback, but the bass is really the driving force on this track, especially when the drums kick in. Definitely showing they can definitely rock out if they want to. But it still has some nice kind of breezy, very not quite psychedelic, but definitely on the breezy side, like a pillow of winds, kind of this kind of very nice, feel good track. But then you have the epic on here with Echoes, which is become a staple of theirs. Still have a very psychedelic feel, especially that long middle section where this very eerie sounding keyboard sound that plays through, but has a nice conclusion. Then we all know the story. By 73, they left their mark in music history with this album, The Dark Side of the Moon, which by this point you can't really call them psychedelic rock anymore. They're kind of their own thing at this point.
Yeah.
You're not going to show Obscured by Clouds?
Well, I do, but it's kind of a
It's a
soundtrack
joke.
album.
It's a joke.
Yeah,
Because like, no one remembers that album because
yeah.
it's
No,
just
it was a weird transition album.
Yeah.
But of course, did massive business for them, made them a lot of money, shall we say? But then,
Had their biggest hits probably up to that point. Yeah.
oh yeah, definitely. And then it pretty much was the beginning of their long, big commercial period, where they're still having some experimentation, but still commercially doing insanely well. Of course, yeah, Wish You Were Here next.
Oh yeah.
And this is where Sid Barrett comes back in the fold, because he actually unexpectedly showed up at the studio while they were recording. Literally the song that was dedicated to him, Shine On You Crazy Diamond.
Ah.
And, there's a little story behind it. It was actually a sad story because he came in and nobody recognized him because he gained a lot of weight. He shaved his head. He shaved his eyebrows. He was a completely different person. And he just kind of looked like he was lost the whole time, even by this point. He was probably off the drugs, but it still took a massive toll on him. And when Roger and David found out it was actually Sid, they cried when they realized it, because like their friend is just withered basically.
Yeah.
And that's something Sid Barrett was always a shadow that kind of always hung over the band as they moved forward, because again this album was basically dedicated to him. And of course Sid's story would be major influence on especially Roger Waters, because his lyrically he was starting to venture out. He's even starting getting political by this point. Of course you have Animals, which is his big political album. Of course, again, has some heavy moments at some points when they want to. And then I'll talk about one more album, and this is probably the last of their classic period. And of course, Sid's story is again an influence. Of course, you have The Wall, which is this big concept rock opera here, just about this rock star who's kind of made this metaphorical wall between him and the rest of the world. It's definitely this very a great. I think it's a good way to close out their classic period, because by this point, after this, Roger and the rest of the band would constantly have friction over who was in charge. Roger was definitely starting to be more of the head, and and pretty much the rest of the members were kind of getting tired of it. And of course, Rick Wright would be fired during the recording of this. And so yeah, after this, the history of Pink Floyd gets more messy, but still, definitely one of the big bands that had to be mentioned. Of course, their influence on psychedelic rock and just music in general, just how they pushed the boundaries, and still commercially it did well for them. So definitely worth chatting about.
Yeah, I can't think of anybody that sounds like Pink Floyd, like with the Dark Side of the Moon kind of stuff, and even The Wall is the two albums I know the most. But with stuff just like they have a song called Time, whatever, and you open with just a bunch of clocks, like ringing or whatever, like ringing. It's just cool stuff like that, and very long intros. Like they'd have these huge long intros, and then it kick into the song. Like for me, like I remember first time hearing Pink Floyd, I was like, "What is this?" I've never heard any music like this before. Yeah, so the experimentation is like really cool what they did. This, I don't know. Yeah, I think of them as like, man, they must have really did a lot in the studio. They really spent a lot of time in the studio making those albums, because those aren't things you can do live probably fairly easy, though I'm sure they did it live too, I guess.
Yeah, they did.
But it definitely would be difficult doing live. But who sang them? Was it Gilmore and Rogers? Did they both sing?
Yeah, both sang. I mean, early on it was mainly Sid
And Rick Wright.
and Rick Wright too.
Rick
But
Wright.
yeah, after Sid left, it was mainly Roger, David, and Rick mainly doing the vocals.
Okay. I just know Gilmore and Rogers is like all I really know about the band. I don't even know that much about Sid Barrett, because I guess he was gone by the time I was really listening to their music. Yeah, definitely one of the most biggest influential bands everybody talks about, Pink Floyd. Even the Pink Floyd, the sound Pink Floyd sounds.
Yeah, of course, the name actually came from two blues musicians that Sid and Roger were fans of. I'm blanking on their names, but I know Pink was from one person and Floyd was from another guy.
Ah.
Which one's pink?
All right, I'm going to talk about Jimi Hendrix and the Jimi Hendrix experience. My favorite guitar player during this time period and all time, but man, what a guitar player! That I still don't think anybody sounds like him, and I might be crazy. Someone might be like, "Oh, there's so and so sounds like Jimi Hendrix." And I'd be like, just for me, it's like I don't know how he does it as a guitar player. I don't get how he uses distortion feedback like he does when he uses his music, and that's kind of a big part of his guitar playing. It's just all this distortion and feedback that he's throwing in there, and all kinds of different sounds that I've just never heard before. But of course, Jimi Hendrix, uh, he was a kind of a blues player in the I guess '60s period, and he was doing it. He was a backup blues guitar player basically for a bunch of big bands that were coming, but he'd always get kicked out because he'd do something that'd get him mad. He wasn't always the best rule follower. I mean, he kind of got kicked out of the army as well. He was in the army for like very shortly. um, but yeah, then he got founded kind of by Keith Richards' girlfriend saw him and recommended him to Keith Richards, who recommended to the Rolling Stones manager, who were like, "Oh, his music won't work." You know, it's one of those things like, "How wrong are you?" You know, like they didn't quite get his music at the time because he was getting more experimental at that point and dealing with more psychedelic sounds and stuff. And eventually, though, got on to manager. I'm forgetting now. I don't have the stuff in front of me, but I think it was like a Kinks manager or a Kinks player or no, it was Animals. That's it. It was his manager was a guy that played for the Animals, but quit that band, and then managed Jimmy, and he took him to England. And they first he took a song called "Hey Joe," which was a cover, and that was kind of his first big hit. And of course, he had two other players, a bass player and a drummer here, which I should know their names, but I didn't write them down, unfortunately. But really good players, though.
Noel Redding on bass and Mitch Mitchell on drums.
Noel Redding, Mitch Mitchell, yes, very good players as well. So they kind of formed this trio, the Jimi Hendrix Experience, whatever. Yeah, and then they came out with this first album, in '67, I believe it was. Are You Experience? And I mean, man, look at that cover. It's just psychedelic. Again, I love this cover. And just Jimi Hendrix, he was so psychedelic with his fashion, as Bryer talked about. I was going to say, yeah, he definitely lived it with the fashion. He definitely was a big drug user. And yeah, his music just very experimental at that time. But I love this album. It's my favorite album of his. I think to me, it's like you definitely have to listen to this album to get into this is like one of the best psychedelic albums, I think, or hard rock psychedelic style albums, just with all the feedback and distortion and the heavy riffs and great guitar solos, just incredible guitar solos here. But I mean, you got Purple Haze, which is a huge hit for him, probably his biggest hit at this time. With that bum bam bum bam bum bam ba da da da. I mean, that's such an amazing opener guitar riff into that song, and then but Manic Depression is a very underrated song, but great as well. The Wind Cries Mary was also, I think, a hit on the radio as well. It's a little slower. It's not as big and not as rocking, but Fire is an absolutely incredible song. It's one of my favorite on the album. Another very heavy rock song that is really awesome. And then Foxy Lady. I love Foxy Lady. That's another one where, man, I mean, this album to me is like almost like a great hits. It has legitimately, I think, like 4 of his biggest hits maybe on here. Not counting Fire, which I don't think was a hit song, but should have been. But yeah, Foxy Lady is another one where that the way he fades in with that guitar, and then the bam 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 da 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 da. Oh, just incredible riffs, solos, all that. But yeah, this definitely is like the big psychedelic album that he came out with. Of course, he only did 3 albums, so I mean, I recommend that one especially. But I mean, it's hard not to recommend all 3 because that's his whole career. But he had Access Bold to Love, which I believe is a double album.
No, that was Electric Ladyland.
Electric Lady was a double album. Okay, so Accessible Love. It's not. I don't. It's funny. I've heard people say, "Oh, that's my favorite album," or "Electric Ladyland's my favorite album." Or Everybody has their favorite album because I guess all three are considered kind of, very well respected. I think. I think that one has a little wing on it. I think is that the one?
That's on Axis, yeah, Little
Yeah,
Wing.
that's my favorite song on that one. And I don't have any of his other albums, so I can't remember all that's on there. But he didn't really have any big hits as far as I can remember. And then he did Electric Ladyland, which has another huge hit. His other probably maybe his biggest hit, All Along the Watchtower, which was a Bob Dylan cover, of course. And oh my gosh, amazing song. That beginning, bum 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 bum, and then the bum whatever he gets in that guitar solo at the beginning. I mean, all the sound effects, so awesome, and how he starts that song, and another amazing. Again, I just love his guitar playing and guitar soloing, and the riffs are so amazing. Just really good psychedelic and hard rock kind of feel to them. But yeah, that's definitely the big song in there. That's a pretty good album. That's my second favorite album from him. But I mean, you can't go wrong with all three, in my opinion. Of course, unfortunately, he would die in, I believe, 1970 of a drug overdose at age 27. So another one of those tragic early endings to one of the great rock guitar players of all time. Unfortunate, anyways. But yeah, that was kind of his career. But definitely, I think you need to listen to Jimi Hendrix and his influence on the guitar playing is just, I think, astronomical. Anyway, so yeah, that's Jimi Hendrix. Nick, you can go next.
Okay, I'll go over two bands because one I'm going to go over very, very briefly.
Okay.
One I'm going to go over very briefly is, of course, the Grateful Dead.
Yeah.
That's the one Jason gave me to do. Another one. So the big member to really push on is Jerry Garcia. Outside of Grateful Dead, he played a big role in music in California. Of course, if you didn't know, on this album, he was, if you look in the back, Jerry Garcia, musical and spiritual advisor. So he plays a big influence in Jefferson Airplane. So I figured do Airplane first and then bring up the Grateful Dead as well. I just wanted to bring Jefferson Airplane up one last time for that. Of course, he played a guitar on Teach Your Children, the slide guitar on that song. So he's played some pretty big roles in some pretty big bands in the 60s to early 70s. But of course, his baby, his band, the Grateful Dead. This is their first album, aptly named The Grateful Dead. This is definitely the least Grateful Dead sounding album. They focus more on San Francisco sound, psychedelic rock. It's really much more to say. And then, of course, the second album, Bryer showed it already. Anthem of the Sun, I think it's called. They'll kind of go into more slower, longer songs that, to me, I didn't think worked that well. If you know me well, you know I think that album sucks. I don't recommend that album. Then they would kind of go into their own sound. Their follow-up, Wake Up the Flood, they would kind of go a little away from that. American Beauty as well. Ricky Man's Dead, they actually go into more country music on that album. So thank you, Bryer, for showing those albums. So yeah, it's interesting to hear them kind of go away from the psychedelic rock. They're primarily the psychedelic rock is those first two albums, specifically that first album. But that's just all I want to say about Grateful Dead. The last psychedelic rock band that Jason gave me was The Doors. Now, The Doors, they really had such a big role in the San Francisco sound of 67. I know so many bands from San Francisco.
Yeah.
Big role. Jefferson Airplane, Grateful Dead, Doors.
Wow.
There's actually tons of other bands that I'm not even thinking of right now.
I can kind of see that. I feel like people do a lot of drugs in San Francisco. That was kind of a hippie. That was kind of hippie. That was a real hippie place. hippies love San Francisco, if I remember right.
Yeah.
Flower Power and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, we have their debut album, The Doors. Going back to what Bryer said way back with the Doors of Perception, that's where
That's
Jim,
fortunate.
that's where Jim Morrison would meet Ray Manzarek in college, and that's where Jim Morrison was like, "Got to open the minds to the doors of perception," and like I guess Ray Manzarek was like, "Hey, this guy gets what I could dig into this guy," and then they became good friends, and that's when they formed the band. And it's interesting to think they were like, if I'm correct, I think they were on a beach when they met each other, and yeah, like Jim
Yeah.
Morrison started singing to him, and Ray Manzarek liked the guy right away, and they became like really really close friends after meeting each other that day. I find it to be I find it to be a very wholesome story the way they met each other, so nice. Uh, let's talk about the album though. The End. That has to be like the most psychedelic song that the Doors have. One of the most psychedelic songs that they've ever done for this album.
Yeah.
Morrison went through the poetry and all that. So far out. There's a lyric, "Father, yes, son, I want to kill you."
Yeah.
I found that to be pretty shocking of a lyric.
Yeah.
Killing your own father. That's just no one
Yeah.
knows about that. Of course, "Light My Fire" got that jam session in the middle of that song, which
I hope his dad didn't listen to that record.
me too.
Heck, Jim Morrison would say, "How are your parents?" And in interviews, Jim would say, "Oh, they're dead, even though they're all alive."
Really?
Yeah, he would do that just to mess with them.
Jeez. Oh my gosh, that's crazy. But yeah, that like I said, that lyric definitely got to me.
Yeah.
Father, yes, son, I want to kill you. It's like what? I wouldn't want to be the father
Not
of
as
that.
messed up as you find out what he does to the mother.
Oh yeah, mother, I want to. Like I'm like, oh no.
Like, Jim, we got questions for you.
Jim Morrison.
Ah, LSD's a hell of a drug.
Yes. Of course, Crystal Ship kind of has a little, not psychedelic song per se, but it kind of gives the visuals of psychedelics. Yeah, this is like their least psychedelic album of the first two albums. Of course, their second album I don't own on vinyl. That is Strange Days. That album took what they were doing on the first album and amplified that to a bunch. Not as much as Jefferson Airplane did from Surrealistic Pillow to After Bathing in Baxter's. That the difference between those albums are like but like this, it's like here's the Doors, here's Strange Days, here's Surrealistic Pillow, here's Bathing at Baxter. So definitely a difference between those two bands when they went to the next album. Strange Days, you get the synthesizers even before the Beatles started doing synthesizers. That's cool to know.
Yeah.
Your Lost Little Girl, pretty dark song. Definitely a more creepier album if I'm also gonna be honest. Love Me Two Times, the most poppiest, the most upbeat song on the album. I don't know why this is on the. I love the song, but definitely feels out of place on the album. Unhappy Girl, kind of going back into that dark, gloomy, psychedelicness that they were going. Then there's just Horse Latitudes, where it's just Morrison going, "When the horse laid down," or something like that. Like he's just babbling on about nonsense. It's just like what I mean, like Bryer said, LSD is a hell of a drug. Moonlit Drive. What's interesting about this song is that that's the song that Morrison sung to Ray Manzarek on the beach.
Really?
Yeah, that's the song he sung to him, which is pretty cool. People Are Strange, iconic song. Still, it's a creepy song.
Oh, that's true.
This album's very creepy, and I love it. My Eyes Have Seen You, I Can't See Your Face in Mine. More, again, kind of fitting the theme of the album. Then the album ends on When the Music's Over. If you thought the end was crazy, When the Music Over was like that, multiply that by a gajillion. There's a part of the song where they scream something about like, we want the world and we want it now. like it's even crazier than how I'm depicting it. It's like, we want the world and we want it now. It's like, no one was singing that. No, the Beatles weren't doing that. Not even Jefferson Airplane was doing that. Like, they were really going balls to the walls on this track. And for that, it's a song that I really like. And it's, what a great closing track, in my opinion. Jason, I don't recommend you listen to it. It's 11 minutes of nonsense. If you didn't like the end, you would really not like when the music's over.
Uh-huh.
Then we got Waiting for the Sun. As the follow-up. Not as psychedelic as the last album. That Strange Days album is the most psychedelic you'll ever get from them.
Okay.
There is one song, though, that is worth mentioning on this album. That is... Actually, there's two that I want to mention. First one being Not to Touch the Earth. And this song is crazy. Ask Scott. Scott told me he was downright scared of this song when he heard it. It's a really creepy song. It goes crazy, and again, it goes balls to the wall. And what makes the song great is that at the end, Morrison goes, "I am the Lizard King." And it's like he goes, "I am the Lizard King."
He loved the Lizard King thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I can do anything, and it just ends. Boom, because like it closes out like you thought the song was about to end, and it's just like, okay, it's gonna end. It's like, I am the Lizard King. I could do anything. Boom, and then it ends like that. It's like, what the fuck? What is this? And of course, one more kind of psychedelic song I want to talk about is "Unknown Soldier." Basically, I mean, again, this is like Vietnam. We're talking about Vietnam times, and another song that goes pretty much balls to the walls, and then there's that. They would follow that up with the Soft Parade, 69. Now the psychedelicness, they're kind of going further away from that. They're kind of leaving more of that and more pop and more blues direction. Like there's blues, but then there's pop songs like Force Touch Me. Everyone knows that song. Come on now, touch me, babe. Yeah. Which is great. The most psychedelic they get is the Soft Parade, where it's like an 8-minute collage of like songs. That's pretty cool. Of course, got the gatefold here, which is probably the most psychedelic part of the album, if you're asking me. The album is nowhere near as psychedelic as that album cover. Then we follow that up with Morrison Hotel, or what I like to call it, Morrison Motel, because MM, you know. I could have sworn this was called Morrison Motel, but you know, Mandela effect. But
yeah.
This album is now there's like really little psychedelic stuff on this album. This is like
the blues feel to them at all, you think, or
this is the most blues rock album.
Okay.
It gets a little heavier at times on this. Peace for All gets pretty heavy. It's like psychedelic but heavy at the same time. But yeah, this is more of a blues rock album. Kind of going back to what Jason was saying when we were talking about the blues rock. This is a pretty big album for that. Probably my least favorite of the Morrison albums, but there's still a lot of songs in here.
Yeah.
Like Roadhouse Blues, I really enjoy. You know, gotta roll, baby, roll.
Okay.
What were we gonna say, Jason?
I said I'd never heard of that one, so yeah, you're getting the albums I don't know.
And then there's this album, the last album with Jim Morrison.
Yeah, it's a big
LA
one.
Woman.
LA Woman.
Now there is no psychedelicness to this album. Like anything you could have heard from that debut album is pretty much gone. Like this is new door sound, all blues. there's a little bit of pop moments on this album, but this is a blues rock album. Changeling, that's a great blues rock song. Lover Madly is a great pop song. Been Down So Long, really good blues song. LA Woman, great rock song. L'America, definitely the second creepiest song on the album. The creepiest being, of course, Riders on the Storm. If you know, you know.
I just storm.
But yeah, it's interesting how the Doors could go from like this psychedelic band from San Francisco to the more blues direction that they'll go on LA Woman. So it's interesting to hear the direction that they would have gone even further. But sadly, that's where the story ends because Jim Morrison will go to Paris and he would not come back because he died. And well, they would release 2 more albums afterwards with the other 3 guys singing. And that's when they end. And well, sad story. Would have been nice to see what they could have done afterwards, but well, just all I gotta say is the 2 psychedelic albums that I definitely recommend if you want to hear them. Go psychedelic, Strange Days and The Doors. But I also my 2 favorite albums are these 2 right here. Waiting for the Sun and Soft Parade. These are both albums that made my top 100 albums list. So big fan of these, but for the most part, people will recommend you the debut in LA Woman. Yeah, that's my
The debut in LA Woman's one I hear people talk about the most, probably.
yeah, and then the ones that my 2 favorites are the 2 probably least favorites of the yeah, that's my whole thing on the Doors.
Yeah, I mean, Light My Fire is like the big classic there, and I really like Love You 2 Times. It's maybe my favorite.
Yeah, which is interesting because it's on like their most psychedelic album.
I'm going away. Bah, bah, bah. Yeah, and really the what differentiates them from anybody else, I think, is that keyboard playing is so good. Really kind of really that's their sound to me, is that keyboard, whatever. Organ.
Other bands would try to replicate that. Like even the Grateful Dead on their debut, they like it's like really keyboard heavy, and you definitely hear the influence from the Doors.
He plays like 2 different keyboards with the hand. Or I mean, he does something really.
Yeah, because the story behind that is that they didn't really have a bass player at all.
Yeah,
In the studio, they would get a session guy, but live, you know, Ray would play the keyboard, but then on top he's playing another keyboard that's doing all the bass notes.
Okay.
He's like doing 2 things at once.
Crazy. I don't know how he does. He's talented, but yeah, Doors definitely one of the biggest bands of this period. Very influential. All right, Bryer, what band do you want to talk about next?
All right. Well, I was gonna do this first, but because Nick mentioned Sid Barrett, I was like, I'll go with Pink Floyd first. So yeah, might as well. But now we'll go back on track. You know, Jason mentioned the Beatles, so might as well go back to their dirty counterparts. And now being the Stones, the Rolling Stones. So let's see where they left off. So of course, you know, another British invasion band. But you know, they were kind of more of the blues. They were kind of in the blues rock for the most part early on. Even early on, they were kind of in that vein. But by get to like the mid '60s, you get a little change, you know. And the album that kind of was starting to showcase more of that change, I feel. Oh, don't drop it. Okay, I got it. Was this one? You got Between the Buttons from '67. And, you know, this is when they're starting to move away from the blues rock and starting to incorporate other different types of influences. Of course, here you have some Baroque pop, even a bit of music hall. Still has a very commercial sound to it. And they're starting to bring in other instruments. I dropped it again. Anyhow. And really because of Brian Jones, who was also bringing all these new instruments into the band and just playing around. Did really well for them. There were some pretty big songs on here. Of course, you had the big hit like Ruby Tuesday and other songs. You know, Let's Spend the Night Together. Of course, there's different versions. There's US, UK. I have the US version. But still was a big shift. And like I said, commercially did kind of pretty well. And so after that album, the band decided, psychedelic rock seems to be a thing. Let's go gung ho about it. So then we got their Satanic Majesty's Request.
Yes.
I guess you could say they're a psychedelic masterpiece.
Definitely the most.
Yeah. Question mark. So yeah, Between the Buttons did well. This album didn't do as well. Because it was kind of a controversial thing because as you can see, it's kind of many accused it of being a ripoff of Sgt. Pepper, basically. And it's them really going in the psychedelic field, and to most people, it didn't really do well. There's still a lot of crazy experimentation on here, a lot more instruments that Brian Jones brings in, and of course, historically, it's also the recording was very hectic because I think Mick and Keith got busted for drugs around this time, and so members were never at the same time in the studio, so it was like a guessing game on who's going to be here, and I think so. Yeah, so of course you have like songs like "Sing This All Together," and which is yep.
I want to also add that Keith Richards had an affair with Brian Jones's girlfriend at the time. And yeah, let's just say that didn't leave for a good working environment. I just had to quickly add.
And also drugs.
Lots of it.
Way more drugs than before. But anyway, so yeah, sing this all together pretty much is a good indicator of where you're in for, but there's still some okay songs. You have Citadel, that's kind of a more harder rock sort of track, but still has a psychedelic feel. But then you get the weird stuff with In Another Land and 2000 Man here. And then you have Sing This All Together, a longer version. And yeah, just this big jam thing. But then you get some other poppy moments. You have She's a Rainbow. Most people enjoy that song. That's like the one song people remember the most from this album.
Yeah, recognizable.
Yeah. Then you got more stuff like The Lantern, Gomper, 2000 Light Years from Home. Yeah, it's a very, very, very odd album, to say the least. But yeah, as stated, this album did not do nearly as well as they've done before, and so they would quickly come to their senses and abandon the psychedelic rock, and finally go back to what they're good at, and that is the good old rock and roll, good old bluesy. And this is when the hard rock is starting to be more of a prevalent feature. Of course, you have Beggar's Banquet, 68. Had some big songs, of course, like Sympathy for the Devil, of course. And even a little bit of a country thing starting to creep in as well. So they're starting to take influence from that as well. Stuff like No Exception, great song. Of course, by this point, Brian Jones was really starting to be checking out. And so by this point, he was basically not really involved. I mean, No Exception's his last contribution to the meaningful contribution. To say he's on the next one, but not like only on 2 tracks.
Yeah.
But still some good hard rock and songs like Jigsaw Puzzle. Then you have other songs like Stray Cat Blues, Salt of the Earth, Street Fighting Man, of course. I mean, that's a great rock song right there. So yep. This is basically the beginning of their big period. This is probably their most commercially and critically acclaimed stuff right here is around this time. And of course they would follow it up with, and I have this on record, of course you have Let It Bleed, of course. It's kind of more towards the country influence, but you still have some great rocks on the more hard rock, like Gimme Shelter, of course, which was definitely the big highlight of the album. But you still have some more blues rock, like Midnight Rambler, of course. And of course, you have some other gospel influence with "You Can't Always Get What You Want." So yeah.
Yeah.
Then of course you go into the 70s now, and by this point, this is basically Brian Jones's technical last album. Though again, he's only on 2 songs, and of course he would die around this time as well, at the age of 27.
Yeah, I talked about. That's just crazy. Like I just talked about Jimi Hendrix. Nick just talked about Morrison. You're talking about Jones. All died at age 27.
That's great. That's actually a crazy coincidence that we all mentioned 3 in a row.
Yeah, all those kind of cases, I guess. And, yeah, Jones. It sounds like kind of what you're saying about Sid Barrett. He was there, but he wasn't really there, kind of.
Yeah, again, drugs, and also his tensions with the band, his grievances with the other members, especially with Keith. But yeah, of course, the band would continue on. Of course, in the 70s, they would have other landmark albums, like, of course, Sticky Fingers. Then you have the Exile on Main Street. And again, and also Goat's Head Soup. Of course, Mick Taylor's is big part of these albums at this point, and even It's Only Rock and Roll, which to most people is kind of the end of that big period of them. And then from that point on, where they would kind of go into even more different directions. Black and Blue have some reggae influence. But yeah, that's where I'll leave off with the Stones. But yeah, just kind of they tried psychedelic rock, didn't work for them, but then they kind of went back to their roots and went back to what they were good at, and that's the good old blues, bit of hard rock, and even some country in there as well. So that's what I'll leave off with the Stones.
Yeah, I would say their big influence maybe is on blues rock music. I would say at this period, for sure. Yeah, so I'm going to get into end of the 70s, starting the late 60s. That is Led Zeppelin. What can you say? Led Zeppelin, one of the biggest names of rock music, coming really in the late 60s from the Yardbirds, basically. Jimi Hendrix. I keep saying that. Jimmy Page was playing for them, and then that's when they added. At some point, I forget exactly what happened, but at some point they kind of some of the other members I think left, and then he added John Bonham on drums,
and Robert Plant.
Robert Plant, lead singer, and then
those two were pretty much a package deal.
And then now I'm forgetting the other name,
John Paul Jones.
Paul Jones, yeah. So there's 2 Johns, right? Yeah, John Paul Jones on bass. And they in fact were called the New Yardbirds at first, but then I think they're like the other Yardbirds were like, you can't, do that. And they're like, okay, we'll change our name. And then
you mind if I add to that story?
Yes, go.
So basically, they were going to be called the New Yardbirds, and Keith Moon was like, that name's going to go down like a lead balloon.
A lead balloon.
And then they're like, lead balloon. And then they were like, what? Instead of it being balloon, what should we name it? And then they thought of different like blimps, and they're like, Led Zeppelin.
The Zeppelin. And created one of the great names of rock music. Led Zeppelin. Yeah, so they come with Led Zeppelin. They come with their first album called Led Zeppelin, 1969, I believe. I don't have that album. I'm not a fan of that album. A lot of people love that album, though. So it's like, I guess I have to say it's a recommendable album just because it's popular. But it's definitely, the sound is just something else. Like, again, they kind of come from blues rock, somewhat blues rock, I think, style. But they're definitely getting much heavier. They're definitely a heavier sound at this point in 1969. And man, just, I don't know, they just really changed music, I feel like, with Jimmy Page heavy riff guitar. And John Bonham's just, man, his drumming, just pounding drumming, I think he did like a double bass or something like that was what he's popular for. But just the sound, I keep hearing, every time I hear someone talk about John Bonham, it's just like we never heard a drum sound like that, just the way he was pounding on those drums. It's, and no surprise, he's considered like usually by like many be the best maybe rock drum player of all time. I mean, Jim Page is usually top 5 rock guitar player of all time. So, I mean, you got 2 guys that are just considered some of the best in their business. But the first album, I can't say a lot because I'm not a big fan of them. I don't have that one. Um, I think it has Good Times, Bad Times. Pretty good song on there. And there's no song I like on that album. I'm forgetting.
Dazed and confused.
It is confused. Very, yeah. Again, kind of getting the. I don't know if that you call that psychedelic or it's
It's like slightly psychedelic. You're totally right.
slightly maybe. Robert Plant has such unique vocals. He has these very high pitched kind of vocals for the most part, and does these kind of screeches that are really cool, that really work for the band. It's just all the parts just fit together so well, I thought. Um, but yeah, anyways, to me that album was more bluesy. That's why I'm not a big fan of that first one. But a lot of people love the first Led Zeppelin because it's a little more bluesy, I feel like. But then they come out also in '69. They come out with Led Zeppelin 2, which I do have that album, and it's one of my favorite Led Zeppelin albums. I love this album, and it's definitely. I guess it's not as bluesy as the first one, so I love it. But man, it's the guitars sound so heavy. It's just the very first song, "Whole Lot of Love," is one of my favorite Led Zeppelin songs, and it's just, man, is it a heavy guitar riff? I mean, man, when you put that on the record on and you hear that, oh my gosh! Like I always say this, I always say like my blood starts pumping. I'm just like I'm ready to rock. I'm like, yeah, let's rock. I'm ready to do some headbanging or something. I'm like, yeah, that song really gets me every time I hear it. Just man, I don't know how you can sit still when you listen to that song. It's just one of those like, man, it's rocking. Um, but like, What Is and What Should Never Be is a great. It's not as rocking, hard rocking. It has some good hard rock. It still has some pretty good guitar in there. Heartbreaker, another man, amazing guitar playing by Jimmy Page, and a guitar solo there. Living Loving Maid, She's Just a Woman, another pretty big hit for them. And Ramble On, they're kind of the big hits on here. But yeah, it's just a really, man, great rock album. Um, it's my second favorite of theirs, in fact. But yeah, they're just, man, when they came on, I don't know, it was just something different. Every time I read about them or something like that, it felt like nobody was sounding like them at that time. And they really took the world by storm because these albums did very well. Uh, it's funny, they never had like any number one hits, but they had tons of hits on the radio, of course. Now you got Led Zeppelin 3, which again, I don't have that one. I don't have a lot to say about that one, except for the Immigrant Song is a really incredible rock song to begin that album. Again, so iconic. Again, that Robert Plant, the way he does those screams was so cool, and really great rock riff as well. And I mean, Robert Plant really makes that song. The rest of the album is not as rocking as that song. That's like the big rock song. That's funny. That album is a little more
Folk rock.
folk rock. Yeah, it's not as rocking. It's a decent album. It's not one of my favorite out of them. But then you get to Led Zeppelin. You can call it Led Zeppelin 4. Led Zeppelin 4. You can call it Man with Sticks. You can call it, I don't know, Untitled. I don't know what you want. There's no title, but we call it Led Zeppelin 4. This is to me like their magnus opus. This is their just absolutely one of the greatest rock albums of all time. Very high on my top 100 albums list when I get to that. Absolutely love this album. It doesn't have the songs on here.
Black Dog, rock and roll.
What's that?
I said Black Dog, rock and roll.
Yes.
Stairway to Heaven.
Black Dog, which I love. Black Dog. Just the again, Robert Plant. Just the hey mom, what do you make you move? He's just almost doing a cappella at the beginning, and then all of a sudden all the instruments come in. It's like, oh man, incredible rock music, and then all of a sudden goes right back to Robert Plant. And then he does these like, yeah, I love Robert Plant's vocals on it, and I love the guitar riff. The drumming is amazing. Everything is great. I love that song, but yeah, I wish I had the. Do I have it? Okay, I think it's just the. Oh, here it is. Okay, Black Dog. Yeah, Rock and Roll, another big classic for them. This has a lot of big hits on it, including Black Dog, Rock and Roll. It's been a long time, rock and roll. Another great guitar. Another great guitar song. Then he closed with my favorite song, the I mean, just the epic song, Stairway to Heaven. And man, that's crazy because it starts off like this very soft ballad, and then it gets a little bit faster, and then we get to that bum 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 bum, and then we get this great guitar solo, and the drumming. He does this thing where he's like ba-dum 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 ba-dum, and I'm like, how is he doing that? It's like so fast on the drumming every once in a while, and then the best part is when all of a sudden it goes from that to this heavy rock song, and it's one of the greatest heavy rock parts where he does that drumming at dun 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 bum 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 and da 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 bum 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 bum. Oh my gosh, it's like absolutely incredible. That part always gives me like goosebumps when they go into that heavy part towards the end. But yeah, obviously they're probably most famous songs Stairway to Heaven and considered to be the greatest by many. But Misty Mountain Hop is another really cool song. Um, Going to California is actually more of an acoustic song, which is an awesome song. I love Going to California. So it's funny how sometimes they can go from the hard rock to the acoustic and do really well. In fact, I usually love their acoustic stuff a lot of times when they go acoustic as well. And then When the Levee Breaks is a really cool, more groovy kind of, I guess you could say maybe one of the more bluesier style songs on the album, but it's a great closer because it's a long song. It's got great overall groove to it throughout the whole song. Not a lot of lyrics. It feels like just mostly instrumental. But I mean, obviously, for me, yeah, Led Zeppelin 2, Led Zeppelin 4, definitely must listens to get that Led Zeppelin sound. And then the other album I'll talk about is House of the Holy, which is my third favorite album from them. Which I think came right after Led Zeppelin 4, I believe. Um, uh, yeah, that's another one. Now to see if I can find what songs are on here. You got the song Remain the Same. Great song. Rain Song's pretty interesting. Over the Hills Are Far Away, amazing. Another huge hit for them. That goes into acoustic and then goes into hard rock as well, which I love when they do that. Crunge is a kind of weird song, but some people like that song.
I'm part of that. Some people.
Nick, yeah. The Dancing Days, another really great. Just love the guitar on there. Dancing Days are here again. Whatever. Jamaica is such an interesting song. It's not hard rock really, but it's I don't know, got reggae or something in there. No Quarter is a very long song. I'm not a fan of, but everybody else loves that song. And then The Ocean's another amazing rock song from them. Obviously, you got also Physical Graffiti, their double album, and Presidents Into That Door. I think the other ones, they're not as well received. For me, in my opinion, I this is just me though. I definitely think Led Zeppelin 2, 4, and House of Holy are has to listens. Other people would probably say Led Zeppelin 1, Physical Graffiti are must listens too also.
And 3 for me as well.
Yeah, so those all those 5 albums I would say are definitely listens for them. But yeah, they are definitely the biggest band of the 70s. Like when I did research on them, I mean they were the biggest act. I mean they were not only their albums and all that was doing extremely well, but their concerts were some of the biggest concerts ever held was by Led Zeppelin, and a huge fan base obviously to this day. One of the biggest rock fan bases, and yeah, it's definitely, I always put this as like one of the like my like Mount Rushmore like great rock bands of all time. It's just, I don't know, just their sound just was so different and hard, and you can say blues, hard rock. I definitely think it's like other hard rock bands, I'm sure, look at Led Zeppelin as like the influence of the harder stuff that would go on further anyway. So yeah, it's Led Zeppelin. Go back to you, Nick.
Okay. Speaking of the person who gave him the name, I'm about to talk about The Who. So, last place we left off for me was their debut album, My Generation. I didn't get really much to talk about after that because that was like their only real British Invasion album. Because after that, they'll go straight to psychedelic rock. First being a quick one. I don't know why, but I forgot to get the record. So I have to show you the album cover of that. I apologize. I don't know why I forgot. It's like an album that I really like. Right here. That's a quick one. And well, they're starting to transition from the hard rock blues that they started with their debut and go into more psychedelic rock that would eventually lead to this album right here, the Who Sell It. But I do want to talk about the quick one more time because the title track, a quick one, is a mini opera. You heard me right, a mini opera of basically a story about a woman who is tired of waiting for her man to come back and has an affair with the truck driver, and the main character comes back and finds her having an affair and was like, I can't believe this. And he was just like, all's forgiven. I don't know. I couldn't be the same person. That person's much better than I am. I couldn't forgive him for that. Now let's get into the Who Sell Out. Of course, this is their big psychedelic album of 67. This is their only psychedelic album that they've ever made. And what's cool about this album is that they go for a more radio approach for most of these songs, where first song on the album, days of the week, Monday, Tuesday.
Hey.
And then after it goes through the days of the week, we get into Armenia City in the Sky. That song is crazy. You have like high pitched vocals. The person who wrote the song actually intended it to be I'm an ear sitting in the sky, but then they misheard it as Armenia City in the Sky. Yeah, it's so crazy. Backwards guitars. It's basically their Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, pretty much. The sea is brown. The sea is brown. Everything's upside down. Armenia City in the Sky. So crazy. I love this song. I'm not sure. I forgot how you guys feel about the song, but this is a song that I've always really loved.
I like the song.
Then it goes into Heinz Baked Beans, which that song's so weird, so stupid. What's for tea, mom? What's for tea, darling? Honey, what's for tea? And then John Entwistle with his deep in vocals. What's for tea, daughter? And then it's like Heinz Baked Beans. More music, more music, more music. More music.
Commercial.
I actually came across Heinz Baked Beans one time at the grocery store.
Yeah.
Like, oh my god!
He got us the picture.
Then it goes into Mary Ann with the shaky hand. I love this song. Mary Ann with the shaky hand. Such a dark horse Who song because no one talks about it. No one ever brings it up. And it's such a fun pop song. It's such a dark horse song on the album. Odorono. It's a song where it's like, oh, this is nice. And then it's like, out of nowhere, it's like, this is a deodorant ad, pretty much. But I love it. Tattoo. Another one of my favorite Who songs. Me and my brother were talking to each other. You couldn't even recognize it was even Daltrey singing the song because he has such a high vocal. Like, listen to the first album. Like, he has like this gruff, darker, like he's singing with like a more blues influence. Like, listen to like I'm a Man. He's like, when I was a young boy, age 5. And then you go to this album. He's like, me and my brother were talking to each other. Like, did someone kick you in the groin, Daltrey? Because how could you go from that to this? It's like crazy the difference between those two, and it's only 2 years. It's crazy that the transformation. It's kind of like with how Jason was comparing A Hard Day's Night to Tomorrow Never Knows. Like the comparisons, like only 2 years. Those two things. It's like it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy to me, and I love it. Our Love Was such a great pop song. Our love was flying. Our love was dying.
That's a good song.
Another great pop song. And then you have I Could See for Miles. Big, heavy like this is when you first hear their hard rock sound that they would adapt in the 70s. I love that song. I mean, everyone loves that song. If you're a Who fan, you have to love that song. You have to. It's law. I Can't Reach You, another great pop song. This is such a great pop album. Medak, another kind of goofy song about Henry who has acne, trying his hard to get the acne away, and then he finds Medak. It's like now his face is as smooth as a baby's behind.
Mm-hmm.
Really fun. And then of course, to me, where the psychedelicness really takes place is Rael, the last song on the album. You have like heavy drums, big, like heavy guitars. It's just such this big psychedelic way to close out the album, and you hear about the captain. You're like, what captain are you talking about? Well, that smoothly transitions to the story of Tommy. Yes, can't talk about the Who without talking about Tommy.
Yeah.
Now, Tommy is a double album, a concept album about a kid who goes deaf, dumb, and blind. The opening song, Captain Walker didn't come home, unborn child would never know him. Boom, 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 boom. But we're staying for another man. Never gonna see him again. Boom, 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 boom. And it's like, I'm a boy. It's like, it's a boy, Mrs. Walker. It's a boy. A son, a son, a son. Great way to open up. Such a great 1-2 punch on this album. I might have to add Overture and It's a Boy. Okay. Oh, I love that. Then it's like 1921. It's like pretty much how all of us felt at one point, where it's like, this is going to be the year. Got a feeling 21 is going to be a good year. I mean, going off track a little bit, that's what I thought the Jets were going to be. So it's going to be a good year for the Jets, but I was singing to myself, like, I shouldn't be over optimistic. But yeah, such a great song.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Another more notable songs on here. Of course, Sparks, which was from the instrumental of Rael, part of that. Acid Queen. I love Acid Queen. I'm the gypsy. Acid Queen. There before you start. Go to the Mirror. Great song. Freaking Pinball Wizard. That song's legendary.
Great song.
We're not gonna take it. I'm free. Welcome. Funny thing about this album is that this was gonna be a hard rock album, but they kind of laid the footnotes with acoustic guitars so that like it was, you could hear it's a very acoustic album, but then they never added the hard guitars that they were supposed to add. And if you want to hear what Tommy was supposed to sound like, listen to the live at Woodstock version. That's where you could hear what they were trying to do with this album. But regardless, this is one of my favorite albums of all time. I'm going to spoil it. This is number 20 on my favorite albums of all time. I love this album. It really holds a special heart in my. This is like this and Escape by Journey are like the first two albums I've ever heard in its entirety that I'm aware of. So I have a really close spot with this album. Then, of course, that goes into this album. Who's next? I mean, unless you're not a rock fan, this is an album everyone knows in the vinyl rock community. This has 4 of their biggest hits. 4 huge hits: Bob O'Reilly, Bargain, Behind Blue Eyes, and Won't Get Fooled Again. And those are like 4 huge, humongous hits for them. And that's like almost half the album right there. But then you have like these monster deep cuts like My Wife, Song Is Over, Getting in Tune. Like those are like, they're not like radio hits, but they're not technically singles, but you hear them on the radio. Like I'd say 8 or 7 out of these songs on the album you hear on the radio to this day. That's how big of an impression this album is. And of course, if you're familiar with Who history, like I am myself, you'll know that this was originally going to be another double album, the Lifehouse Project, but
Yeah.
with a bunch of other songs, but they sadly scrapped it. I mean, of course, when we eventually do a Who series on my channel, I'm going to go, me and Scott will probably go more in depth on
Yes.
the project because there's going to be a lot to talk about with this album in our group. We all love it. Me, you, Scott, and Jacob, there's going to be a lot to talk about. But yeah, that's that. Then, of course, to end off there, I'd say Tommy, Who's Next, and Quadrophenia are like their big three albums that everyone talks about. This is yet another double album. So you got 2 monster double albums. You got Quadrophenia and Tommy. Which one do I prefer? I prefer this one, but I could get why people would prefer Tommy. That album is freaking amazing. Basically, this album is kind of like a guy who's feels alone, kind of distant, like he doesn't feel like he's really a part of the crowd, kind of. It's kind of like how The Wall would end up being like, but not as theatrical as The Wall would be. Plus, the story isn't as cohesive as The Wall either, I'll admit. But notable songs I will mention, The Real Me. Bryer mentioned it before. The bass playing is not your normal bass playing. The Ox, or John Entwistle, to be exact, he is the GOAT of bass players. He is the GOAT.
Oh yeah. Talk about sure, yeah.
He's the Michael Jordan of bass players. He's the Wayne Gretzky of bass players. He's the Tom Brady of bass players. Like, this man cannot be touched. Like, it's just when he's in the studio, he's go boo, 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 boo. Like, on my generation, even like in the mid 60s, he's showing off, like he's flexing his bass abilities. And The Real Me, and this, I gotta say, this whole album is just, this is basically the Ox showing off his bass abilities. Like, it's just, instead of being called Quadrophenia, it should be called the Ox's Bass Symphony or whatever. That's how good it is. And I'm like, an album like this is, if I ever do pick up an instrument, it would definitely be the bass because of this album. This inspired me to be. This would be the album the Ox would be the person who inspired me to be a bassist because of how great the bass playing is on this album. Of course, Keith Moon, one of the greatest drummers of all time.
Yeah.
Can't ignore him either. Of course, Pete Townsend with the boom boom, with the guitar. Daltrey with the awesome vocals. It's like all 4 of these members are legends on their own. But like when you combine them, you have this epic band. Another great album. Of course, Love, Rain or Me. Punk Meets the Godfather. Another epic bass on here. 515. Love so many great songs. Then we got their follow-up album, Who by Numbers. In my opinion, their most underrated album. People often criticize it because it's the follow-up to Quadrophenia. I get it. I totally understand it, but don't listen to this as if it was the follow-up to Quadrophenia. Just listen to it as a Who album, because there's some killer songs on here, like Dreaming from the Waste. Great bass playing on. Again, I gotta emphasize the bass playing. The bass playing is so good. Success Story, I love. They're All in Love. Blue, Red, and Gray. I'm telling you, there's times where it could get a tear in my eye listening to this song. It just gets me sometimes, Blue and Red and Gray, because Townsend was on the verge of suicide kind of when he was getting to this point because of how depressed he was. He was running out of ideas of songs.
Yeah, you're drinking a lot.
Yeah, speaking of drinking, he actually wrote a song called However Much I Booze, and that song is so depressing, even Daltrey refused to sing it. That's why Townsend sung it. So glad you actually brought that up. That's actually pretty cool that you brought that up. That kind of leads into that song. But Blue, Red, and Gray, I don't care. It's just, if you understand the circumstances that he was in, and you think about it, it could get you sad. It's like, oh my gosh, this is such a deep song. I remember when we first did the Who ranking with me, Scott, and Bryer. I remember Bryer really enjoying that song. I'm like, I'm so happy that Bryer likes this song. This is like the song on the album I recommend everyone listen to. Blue, Red, and Gray. Check it out.
I can't remember. I have a song I really love in that album. I'm forgetting now.
Oh, I forgot. Stupid me. Imagine a Man.
Imagine a Man. Yeah, oh, so good.
Another, like, there's a lyric where it's like, imagine a place that, imagine a thing that occurs every day, like a shooting or raping.
Yeah.
Those lyrics are so freaking dark.
Yeah.
Such a dark lyric. Thanks for bringing that up, Jason.
Yeah.
I always forgot about that song. I don't know why. That's like one of my favorites on the album.
Oh yeah, it's a great song.
And of course, I'd say this last album I really want to emphasize on. Who Are You? I mean, freaking Who Are You? This album combines the hard rock of their previous albums from pretty much from Who's Next to Who by Numbers, and they add synthesizers to it. And of course, to all you college geniuses out there that said, the Who sell out, they're not true to themselves. Fuck you. I love this album. Me and Jason love this album. Everyone in our group chat loves this album. This album gets criticized way too much. I don't get it. This is, to me, their best album. New song. It's such a fun song. It's like, you sing a new song. Such a great, I love it's like, I'll write a new song with a few new lines, and everyone wants to cheer it. I love that part. Had enough of feeling good. Had enough of such another banger. 905. I love this song. You get John Entwistle singing on here, and I love the futuristic feel of the song with the robot who kind of gets emotions like, my name is 905. I once become alive. I love that song. Sister Disco. Music Must Change. Great songs. But to me, the real highlight of the album is that second side. That second side is where, like, it's like no one talks about the second side of the album. Everyone always talks about Abbey Road second side, Abbey Road second side. Who Are You second side's what it's at for me. Trick of the Light, banger of a rock song, should have been a big hit. If anything, all 9 of these songs should have been singles, but
yeah,
that's a topic for a different time. Guitar and Pen, this is my favorite Who song or my second favorite Who song.
Oh yeah,
I love that song. Love Is Coming Down. I love. And Who Are You? To cap it all off.
yeah.
I'm not even upset that this is the only big hit that people remember by. I'm like, this should have been the big hit, and then like the other 9 songs should have been hits as well. So this is an album that holds really close to my heart. This is the second Who album I actually bought. This and Who's Next are the 2 albums I bought. And I remember listening to this. I'm like, this must be like a big Who album. And then people are like, oh, this is like one of the worst albums. I'm like, what?
Oh, yeah, what?
And then I'm like, what? And then I met Scott. I'm like, Scott's like, oh, that's like one of my favorite Who albums. And then even Bryer liked it. And Jason, you were like, this is my second favorite Who album. This is the only 10 out of 10 album. Like, okay, at least some people agree with me. At least some people agree with me. And of course, after that album, Keith Moon would pass away, sadly. They would release 4 more albums after that, but I'd say those are the albums that I wanted to touch on. I'd say, if you're asking me, a biased Who fan, I recommend listening to all of those albums I just told you about, especially Who Sell Out, Who's Next, Quadrophenia, Tommy, and Who Are You? But yeah. Sorry, when I'm talking about a band that I really love, I get really explosive. Just wanted to get that out of the way.
Yeah, I agree with you. Guitar and Pen, to me, is one of the greatest discoveries I've had on the Who. That song's amazing. Another band I put in my Mount Rushmore of great rock bands. The Beatles, the Who, Led Zeppelin are definitely on there. Yeah, great band. All right, Bryer. Where are you gonna go? Deep, moody? Where are you going now?
I'm gonna speed run this next one because I gotta go to bed soon. All right,
Okay.
and also I don't know much. I don't have much of this band, but yeah, I'm gonna be kind of moody right now. And Matt Moody is the Moody Blues. All right, so of course, Moody Blues, definitely one of those bands that doesn't get brought up too much, except if you are in the know. Of course, their first album, not quite what people expect. They're kind of more on that, they were kind of in that more bluesy sort of thing. Denny Lane was in the band at one point. Of course, he only appeared on that one album, but then he left, and then eventually they regrouped, and by the time you get to 1967, they pretty much changed the entire sound. Like it's like night and day between the debut and this album, their second album right here, which is Days of Future Past, which is kind of it's not I don't know if it's not quite psychedelic. It's kind of borderlines it, but it's kind of where they're taking rock music and kind of incorporating it like a symphony into it, kind of more symphonic rock in a sense. Some people quote this as this is like a proto progressive rock album, and that's another genre they're kind of lumped into sometimes. But this was definitely a game changer because again, not many rock bands had done this sort of incorporation of rock and having a orchestra with them. I mean, I don't think they were the first, but definitely on this grand scale, something like this. Of course, it's a concept album, of course, about just going through a day, a day in the life sort of thing. You have day begins, then you have dawn, then you have the morning, then you have lunch break, afternoon, evening, and then it closes out with probably one of the most famous songs, "The Night" or "Nights in White Satin," which is that's a terrific song. But yeah, this was definitely the great breakthrough album. But then, of course, they kind of start to drift more in that psychedelic sound. You have the Search of the Lost Chord, which is definitely what has a more psychedelic feel. Kind of, it's not like too out there, but they definitely have a more. This definitely has a more soundscape they're going through. There's more of a vibe rather than being too weird that they're going for. But yeah, this is a pretty strong album. Ride My Seesaw. It's kind of a nice song there. Good catchy melody on that one. And there's a lot of songs that kind of there's like part ones, there's part twos on this one. Like House of Four Doors it's basically a two-parter, but they're separated. So it's kind of an interesting one there.
I really like the song where they sing about Timothy Leary.
Oh yeah,
Timothy Leary's dead.
and we already mentioned him earlier.
On the drug people.
Yeah.
Timothy Leary. That's I don't know. I think that's my favorite song on the album.
Yeah. Okay. Then we have On the Threshold of a Dream. Again, psychedelic, but maybe a little bit more of a progressive rock sound. Definitely a good vibe album. And also a pretty cool album artwork. I like the purple of it. I can't quite tell you what's going on. I think there's a robot on there, but it's definitely a nice, good vibe of an album. And then another one I own is To Our Children's Children.
Wow.
Quite a mouthful there. This is one I've just recently bought, and I remember liking this quite a bit. Again, it's more of a vibe. It's not really too in your face or too out there, but it's definitely an album where you're kind of just caught up in the soundscape and the the story they're kind of pulling you through. So it's a strong album, and I have one more, and I think this is kind of them heading into the 70s now. This is A Question of Balance. Another really good album. It has another big song from them that people know quite a bit. It's called Question. That was kind of the big song here. And yeah, so another pretty good one here. Yeah, so again, Moody Blues definitely. Again, they're definitely a band I need to delve into. I'll admit, I haven't really given them that much time. But when I'm in the mood for them, they usually do a good job to fill the space and have they're really strong vocals, and yeah, good playing all around.
Yeah, me and you were thinking about doing a series on them at some point.
Yeah.
because I feel like they're a band that I feel like that they're so underrated because they're like in that A level of popularity. Because of course you have the S tier popular like the Beatles, the Stones, the Who's, the Queens, but Moody Blues never gets that level of attention that those other bands get, and I feel like I'm also kind of in that portion of people that don't give them the light of day, and I feel like me and Breyer's series on them will give them the attention that I've been sorely missing on them.
All right, Bryer, did you want to cover your last two bands as well, or
If you want, I can do that if you
you need?
want.
I don't know if you want to get through
I
your
mean, I
stuff.
can probably go into 11. So
Right.
yeah. So I could probably go one more go around, and then I'll cover the rest.
Okay. All right. Well, band I was going to cover is a band called Steppenwolf, and they're not a band I know really that well. I did a little research on them. I listened to their first two albums, so I kind of a little bit feel for them. And I put them in here just because they had a great rock sound in the late '60s. I just felt like I wanted to mention them, mostly because their two huge hits are so good and so recognizable in this era. It's kind of I don't know, when you think of the hippies, the '60s hippie movement. I don't know. I think of those songs mostly because of the movie Easy Rider is like this great hippie kind of movie of motorcycle riders, and we're riding free, and all that. And what I looked at the band it formed in LA in 1967, another California, except it's a Canadian American band, so like I think there's like 3 Canadians and like 2 Americans, so it's a mixture of the two countries. But yeah, you got the main one is John Kay. He's the main singer and guitar. He's a rhythm guitar player. But we have Goldie McJohn, keyboardist, Jerry Edmonton, drummer, and Michael Monarch, guitarist, and Rushton Marive, the bassist. Anyways, the big thing is they're definitely got some hard rock, definitely some bluesy too. I would say they definitely, especially the first album, I feel like really got some bluesy kind of stuff in as well. But yeah, their first album, which is called Steppenwolf, titled, came out in '67, I believe,
Yeah.
or '8. Yeah. Of course, this went number 6 in the charts, so top 10 in the charts. It has the huge song "Born to Be Wild," their first like really big hit, which went number 2 in the charts, so almost number 1. And it was very heavily used in the movie Easy Rider at the beginning. If you've ever seen that movie, at the beginning, like they're riding the motorcycles and you see just this big shot of them and you hear that "Born to Be Wild," which fits so well with, riding motorcycles. But get your motor running, head out on the highway. I mean, I like John Kay's voice. He has a great rock voice for the song, and it's amazing. It was in my top 10 songs for that year. Yeah, it's an absolutely amazing song. Also, they used the word heavy metal in the song, which was referring to a motorcycle, heavy metal. But I think it's something about where my research said that the first time they used the word heavy metal, which would then eventually become an old genre itself. So I don't know if that's where they got it from, this song, the term heavy metal, but that's what it sounded like. Perhaps is where they got the idea. I don't know. But there's also a song called "The Pusher," which is also in the movie Easy Rider. So those two songs are in the movie. "A Girl I Knew" was also, I believe, single on the album. Not a huge hit, but was another single that came off here. Me personally, I really like the song "Barry Rides Again." I think it's a really
I love that song. It's like their
yeah,
ode to Chuck Berry. Yeah.
great ode to Chuck Berry, which me and Bryer talked about in the first episode of the '50s rock. One of the greatest influencers of the R&B rock music of the late '50s, whatever. And his guitar playing is definitely like one of the most influential guitar players at that time, because what he was doing was like ahead of its time. But yeah, Barry Barry Rides Again has a very '50s rock style, but yet somehow it's a hard rock song, but has a '50s sound to it. It's really cool. And he talks about, of course, Barry being Chuck Berry, and talks about Johnny B. Good in there. And Yeah, I just love it. And the piano. Oh man, the piano is so good. The like really fast piano playing. It reminds me of some of the great, Little Richards and Jerry Lewis's of the '50s. So good. But overall, I thought it was a good album. I actually quite like this album. It's the best of the two albums I heard. It was my favorite of the two.
What I have a question. What do you think about Desperation? The
Des-
slow ballad on the album?
What's that?
Desperation. What was your thoughts on that song?
I'm forgetting it at the moment, but
I'll say maybe at some point me and you gotta review that specific album because I've been wanting to talk about that album for a very long time. Steppenwolf.
yeah. There's like the Hoochie Coochie Man is very like bluesy style,
It's an okay song.
whatever. It's a little bluesy for me, but and there's a couple songs I felt like a little too bluesy for me, but they overall have a really good sound to it, and I would recommend that. I've only heard it once. I would say that's a good album because it has a huge hit on it. Their second album also did really well. It's called The Second, uh, and it went number 3 in the chart, so it even did better than the first one. It was their highest charting album. And this has Magic Carpet Ride, which also went number 3 in the charts. And that is an awesome song. Oh, man, that's my favorite song because that beginning part, that fade or whatever, you were done me to find. Come on with me on a magic carpet ride. Oh, close your eyes, girl. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, guitar playing, the drumming, everything. There's a really interesting middle part, which is just instrumental, and then it cuts right back into the chorus. You don't know where. Yeah, obviously you probably know those two songs, "Born to Be Wild," "Magic Carpet Ride." Really amazing rock songs. Yeah, second album. I don't know. I wasn't super crazy about it. I need to listen to it again. It was okay. I probably need to listen to it again to get more into it. Uh, their third album was the other. I didn't listen to it really, but it went number 7. And the first 3 albums were top 10 albums, and then the albums kind of didn't get in the top 10 after that. They had a hit song called "Rock Me," which I heard it. I never heard that song before, but I listened to it. I wasn't that crazy about it, but it went number 10 in the chart, so I didn't realize that was like a hit song for them. But anyway, so from what I've read, it sounds like those 3 albums are the 3 big ones from them. I can only say the first one I really think is definitely a recommend. They ended up breaking up like in '72. They were around for like 5 years or so, I think, as a band, and they kind of started breaking up anyways. But anyways, so yeah, Steppenwolf, it's an interesting album, interesting band I need to get more into, but definitely got a great rock sound to them.
Maybe we might have to do a series on them in general if you want to get into them.
Do more other stuff, but
I'm a big fan of Steppenwolf. I'm not as vocal about it because I know everyone else. I figured that no one else would be interested in them, so I wasn't as vocal about them.
Yeah,
maybe at some point, me and you should get together and do that. Hey, you mentioned heavy metal. Now let's talk about Black Sabbath. Yeah, got a great little prelude into Black Sabbath. This is the last band that I was given from Jason. Black Sabbath. I mean, such a legendary band for like early 70s. They were the pioneers of heavy metal. They were the band that popularized it pretty much, which was freaking awesome. But of course, we got their debut album called Black Sabbath, and I wonder what the first song of the album is. Black Sabbath, huh? So we have a song from Black Sabbath on the album Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath. Yeah, pretty funny, but yeah. Of course, all 4 members. Ozzy Osbourne is the big member. Everyone knows and loves Ozzy Osbourne, whether it be for music or reality television.
reality TV.
Tony Iommi, legendary guitarist, arguably the greatest guitarist in my opinion, if you're asking me. Then you have Geezer Butler, the bassist, arguably one of the best metal bassists in my opinion. I mean, no one really quite matched Butler after he left. There were a couple of times where he would leave, but after he left a couple of times, no one could really quite match his great bass playing. Then Bill Ward, the drummer, and that made up the classic lineup in the first 6 albums, the first 8 albums, really. Of course, like I said, Black Sabbath, great song, very moody, opens up on such a haunting way. Ozzy Osbourne sounded like he came from hell when he sang the song. What is this? Bum, 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 bum. Oh, God, please, no. To me, the guitar playing is great, too. Like, great song. NIB, Nib, also you could say. You might be wondering, what does that stand for? Well, if you would watch our series, you would know that there really is no meaning behind that. It's just they just went with NIB.
Yeah, Nick and Bryer went through the whole Black Sabbath discography on Nick's channel. Yeah.
Yeah. I know Jason, Scott, and Jacob would hate this song because it's about how the devil fell in love. So I don't know if this would be a song you would care for that much. Another song I do want to mention is Warning. That's a great closing track. One more thing I do want to mention is there are 2 different versions of this album. There's the European version, and then there's the North American version. One has Evil Woman on it, one has Wicked World, the American version being the one with Wicked World. Both good versions that I recommend. And of course, after that, you get their famous album, Paranoid. I mean, that's the album that has their 3 biggest songs on there. War Pigs, Paranoid, and Iron Man. Those are their 2 monster hits. I don't like it as much as their other albums, in my opinion. To me, this is I know this sounds controversial, but this is my least favorite album of the Ozzy period, in my opinion. But there's still, like I said, those 3 songs I mentioned are great. Of course, Fairies Wear Boots, or on another note, Jack the Stripper. There's no such thing as a Jack the Stripper song. They just put that on there. But yeah, still great album. Then you have Master of Reality, which that's like their big third album, I should say. First song of the album is very big because it's the first like stoner metal song, which is interesting. Like stoner metal. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Very, very interesting. So that became its own genre. But yeah, it's some other great songs too. I don't want to go too in depth on these. I literally did a series on them. Then you have Volume 4. I think all 3 of us really like that album. Even Jason likes the album, which I was very happy to see. Very happy to hear. Of course, this is the album that has their masterpiece of a ballad, Changes. Yeah. I'm going through changes.
Yeah.
And then after that beautiful ballad, you get FX. With that, it's there. Then Supernaut. I love Supernaut.
Oh, it's such a good song.
Yeah. Then a drum solo. I'm not going to replicate the drum solo, but such a legendary song. Wheels of Confusion, Tomorrow's Dream, Under the Sun. I mean, such a legendary. It's like it's their Cocaine album, and it's my 3rd favorite Black Sabbath album. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, definitely their darkest album, their darkest sounding album. The title track. Can't remember the other song. National Acrobat, Sabracadabra, Who Are You? Not to be mistaken by the Who song, Who Are You? There's actually a Black Sabbath song called Who Are You? And then, of course, you got Sabotage, continuing their big 6. And then they have 2 more albums, Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die, with Ozzy Osbourne. Then he would leave the band. They would have other They would have other albums like Heaven and Hell, Mob Rules with the new lead singer, uh, of course, Ronnie James Dio. Uh, I love those albums. And then they have one album with, of course, Ian Gillan. I love that album too. Has a really has a demonic baby uh, on the album cover, really creepy. But the music is so straightforward. It's the least demonic album that they released up until that point. So it's ironic. You have the most demonic album cover with the least demonic music. It's like, something's not adding up here, guys. So there's that. And then, of course, the Tony Martin period I got to bring up, like Headless Cross. That's my favorite album of theirs. Made it pretty high on my top 100 album series. I didn't want to make this my spiel about Black Sabbath too long because I know Bryer has to leave soon. But all I just gotta say is Black Sabbath, so legendary. Headless Cross I recommend. Born Again I recommend. Heaven and Hell I recommend. And of course I recommend the Big Six from them as well. So yeah, there's that. That's my thoughts on Black Sabbath.
Yes, definitely one of the hardest bands, probably that time period, and interesting lead singer, or at least first one. All right, Bryer, you got two bands you want to cover to end your segment,
right? So I'm kind of disappointed actually because Jason did Led Zeppelin, so I was hoping Nick would do Black Sabbath afterwards, so I can talk about this band next.
Yeah,
And that band would be Deep Purple. Of course, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, Deep Purple. Those are the three that are like the unholy trinity of that would later become heavy metal.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm gonna keep the histories pretty brief, but of course, Deep Purple. I mean, the big members you need to know is Richie Blackmore on guitar, John Lord on keyboard, organ. Like those two were the main guys, and of course you have Ian Pace on drums. And Ian Pace is like the only member to appear on every Deep Purple album.
Okay.
It's funny. Kind of similar with Pink Floyd, how Nick Mason's the only one who's appeared on every album. But in any case, so Deep Purple was, Richie and John were kind of like session guys for the most part. But then they got together, and then they decided to form a band together. And of course, they released their first album in 1968, and this is kind of where they haven't. I mean, this is like the first ever lineup. So again, you have Richie Blackmore, John Lord, and Ian Pace. But of course, the other two members, you have Nick Simper on bass, and you have their lead singer, Rod Evans. And so he was the first singer, and this is like the Mark I lineup. Get used to that because there's many marks to this band. But yeah, their first album, kind of an interesting blend. It's kind of bluesy, has some classical influences there as well, and also a bit of a psychedelic edge to it. But of course, this album actually had a hit. Actually had their hit single. It was called "Hush." It was a cover. It's, pretty catchy song. Na 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 na, which was again kind of got them attention. And so they would kind of continue with this sort of field. Their next album, Book of Taliesin, kind of the same vein. A lot of covers on this album, which is kind of why I'm not as huge in this album, because I think there's a bit too many covers. But still solid enough. And then you get to their third album, which is just called Deep Purple, their self-titled album. And this is kind of when you're starting to hear a change. The music is starting to become a bit more heavier than they were. They're starting to lose the psychedelic influence. They're starting to go way more into heavier sound. And that's because of Richie Blackmore, because he wanted to go into more heavier sound. But they realized they couldn't really do that because they thought their singer, Rod Evans, isn't going to cut it. Just didn't have the voice to match. And so Rod was fired, and I think Nick Simper, the bass player, would leave too. And so they needed a new. They already had an idea on who to get as the singer, and they found him because they were Richie and John, I believe, were just seeing the live circuit, and they came across a band called Episode 6, and they were immediately taken aback. They were immediately impressed by their lead singer, and that singer would be, of course, Ian Gillan,
Mhm.
and of course on bass would be Roger Glover, and they liked what they heard, and so they invited Ian and Roger to join the band, and therefore we have the Mark II lineup of Deep Purple. And of course, the first album with them together is called In Rock. And you see, a very interesting cover with them in Mount
Yeah.
Rushmore, even though they're all British. But yeah, this is kind of right off the gate. It is a much heavier sound. I mean, Speed King just right off the bat, just you have Ian Gill basically belting it out, just almost pretty much shrieking already, because that was a big thing. Like Ian Gillan was definitely helped pioneer, along with Robert Plant as well. Like definitely gave a much more of a influence the more shriek type of vocals, like the more high pitch, the more screams into the sound, into the music, which was pretty awesome, very badass, I must say. But of course, this album also had a pretty notable song with "Child in Time."
Yeah.
This big epic track. Again, a real good showcase of the musicality of the band. And so yeah, this great album. This is definitely, I think, as of now, still my favorite Deep Purple album.
Okay.
Just absolute great heavy album, and just great vocals, and just the band just really firing in all cylinders on that one. They kind of continued on. We have Fireball up next. Not really as big of a hit as In Rock, but still had some live staples that they would play a lot, like the title track, a song called No, No, No. Then you have Anyone's Daughter, which is basically a Bob Dylan tribute in a sense, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, but still not quite as successful. But then you get to this album, which was, to many, it's like the big album. Of course, you have Machine Head from '72.
Machine Head, that's the big one.
Yeah,
There
I'm
it is.
surprised that wasn't your favorite Deep Purple album, to be
it's
honest.
close. It's up there, but I think In Rock in general is more heavy. I like the more heavier nature of In Rock more. But of course, nothing to scoff about this one. Of course, you have big songs like Highway Star. Then you have Pictures of Home, which is a great deep cut. And then, of course, you got, when you mentioned this album, yep, barely. Then you have Smoke on the Water, of course, one of the most iconic guitar riffs ever made. And yeah, and what also makes what also makes Deep Purple even heavier is because you have John Lord there too, and oftentimes he's often doubling Richie's guitar to make it sound even thicker, because he puts a lot of distortion in the organ, which again gives it a much more darker tone, which works great. And of course, you have songs like Lazy and Space Truck and not more live staples. Yeah, great album for sure. And of course, they would have a live album made in Japan, which is pretty much a good showcase on what kind of live act they are. Of course, they were more of a jam band for the most part. The songs were a lot longer. Like Space Truckin's like what, I don't know, 6 minutes on the album, but on this album they stretch it to like 17 minutes, or no, 17 minutes or so.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, a lot of jamming, but still killer vocals, and the band was still top-notch players.
Are they kind of bluesy, would you say?
In some parts they're bluesy, but they also take a lot of influence from classical music, and that's mainly from John Lord, because John Lord was very classical driven, and of course they kind of brought that into the hard rock sound, and a lot of metal bands would take that as well moving forward.
Yeah.
Hence why they're part of the Trinity here.
Right.
But of course, there was starting to become friction. Ian Gillan and Richie Blackmore were notoriously not getting along. They always kind of butt heads about where they should take the band. And eventually, you get to this album, 1973, which is Who Do You Think We Are, which is kind of You can kind of tell the everything was starting to fall apart. Music wasn't as strong. Still had a hit single, which is "Woman from Tokyo," which is not one of my favorite of their singles, but still it was like kind of a moderate hit for them. Yeah, there you go. And so eventually Ian was like, okay, I'm done. I quit. And so once he quit, Roger was like, okay, I'm out too. And so now they were out. They didn't have a singer. They didn't have a bass player. So what the heck are they going to do now? And so shockingly, they found somebody. They found two people to replace those guys. And this is the last album I'll mention. And of course, to take over Ian on bass, they got a guy named Glenn Hughes, who was part of a band called Trapeze. So they brought him, and of course, Glenn could sing too, so he was used as a secondary singer. And who do they get as the main singer, the main frontman? And that guy was a then unknown David Coverdale, who of course would become famous after he joined Whitesnake, after he formed Whitesnake later on.
Okay.
So they made this album, Burn. And I think when the album first came out, it was kind of like, it's good, but there's no Ian Gillan on here. But these days, it's kind of now considered one of their big albums. Like, again, it kind of shows that even without like the key members, like a guy named without Ian Gillan, it kind of shows they could still carry on. And there's still some very great heavy songs like here, like the title track. The title track is just this big, fast-paced, thunderous song. And of course, the vocals are top-notch from both David and Glenn. So awesome stuff. Then you have other songs like Lay Down, Stay Down, Sail Away, You Fool No One, Mistreated. Just a good showcase on the new, especially in David Coverdale, especially Mistreated. Like his vocals on that track are very killer. But yeah, and then from this point on, by the way, this is the Mark III lineup now. And from that point on, they go through many other lineup changes, members coming and going, a lot of more infighting. But, after all that, they're still going on. They just released an album earlier this year. And Ian Gillan's in the band still. Ian Pace, like I said. Roger Glover's still in the band. John Lord, he passed away in 2013. And Richie, he's been long gone, so I don't think he's coming back anytime soon. But still, when it comes to hard rock, there's no band that needs no introduction than Deep Purple.
Where does Perfect Strangers fit into that?
That was 84. That was a bit later. That was like the reunion of the Mark II with Ian Gillan and Roger Glover back. And that was a time period, but of course didn't last long.
The reason why I asked is because that's my second favorite.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, I could have mentioned it, but we're kind of getting more in the 80s at this point, so don't want to go too far ahead.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's Deep Purple.
Yeah.
Then I got one more real quick.
One more.
Yeah. And this is the kind of one of those bands that definitely is a good example of blending hard rock, blues rock, and psychedelic rock.
True.
That band, of course, was Cream. Of course, you have the big power trio right here, and to many, as often cited as the first successful supergroup. Of course, you have Eric Clapton on guitar, Jack Bruce on bass and vocals, and Ginger Baker on drums. And they were all at this point. They were all big names. Eric Clapton, like we mentioned quite a few times already. Yardbirds, John Mayall, and then you have this. And then you have Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker, who are part of a band already called the Graham Bond Organization. Of course, even in that band, Jack and Ginger did not get along. And me and Nick are doing a series on Cream currently. And so I mentioned that Ginger actually threatened Jack with a knife one time. So
Ginger was something else.
Yeah, good old Ginger, our friendly neighborhood drummer.
I will say this: I think he's the GOAT, but in terms of being a person, I don't know about him. He's never.
He's the epitome of don't meet your heroes.
He was super. I don't know.
Yeah.
More. He's like, I love him. He has a great talent, but
yeah.
man, he's so cocky.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
He really is the Tom Brady of drummers.
Yeah. But yeah. So, but they so shockingly, Jack and Ginger decided to get together with Eric and decided to put their differences aside for a time just so they could work. So yeah, they made the first album, Fresh Cream. Um, Definitely more on the blues rocks field, not quite. Just that's basically what it is. Nothing too different or anything, but just some good blues rock. And it's pretty played well. You can definitely see where the band was going. A solid start. You have like NSU, Spoonful, I'm So Glad, which was a good it's a cover, but definitely more catchier songs here. And you have and then you have Toad, which is Ginger's big drum solo, and one of the earliest examples of extended drum solos in rock music, at least on record. Then you have the singles like I Feel Free and stuff like that. So again, solid starts, but it's this album where most people think of Cream. Then of course, you have Disraeli Gears, which is definitely where,
I covered them already, Scott. Sorry to interrupt you, Bryer.
yeah, no worries. This is when they really started to incorporate the psychedelic rock sound. I mean, the album cover didn't give it away enough.
You guys just covered this band, didn't you? Or
Yeah,
We just covered that album.
just covered the album. So yeah, just definitely the music is evolving. It's a great blend of the blues and the psychedelic. Strange Brew, Sunshine of Your Love, of course, was a big song. Dance the Night Away, which is psychedelic for sure. Same with Tales of Brave Ulysses. And you have other psychedelic moments, like there's a song called SWLABR, which is an acronym for I've already forgot what it was. I forgot what L and A were.
A bearded rainbow.
Oh yeah. That's it. Yeah, something bearded. It has something to do with a bearded rainbow. Whatever.
Bearded Rainbow.
Yes.
Yeah, she was a late. She was. She walks like a bearded rainbow.
She walks like a bearded rainbow. There we go.
Okay.
Again, psychedelic for you.
Yeah,
That's a new one by me.
the painting has a mustache.
Yeah, Jack had said like, yeah, we have no idea what we were singing about. But yeah, still, granted, there's some jokey songs like on here, like Mother's Lament, which is that's a thing. Same thing I can say about Blue Condition, where you have Ginger singing, and I'm like, yeah, Ginger, stick with the drumming,
You
please.
shouldn't sing it.
Blue Condition.
Yeah. And then you have Wheels of Fire, which is going to be by the time we are doing this, we haven't done the episode yet, but that's going to be our next episode, me and Nick. But this is where you still have the psychedelic influence in here and the blues, but definitely a lot more hard rock in this one, especially the live disc. It's a double album. You have the studio album, and then you have the live album. And the live album is kind of where you definitely hear that more hard rock influence, because again, you hear just how massively they sounded. Again, you have Eric's guitar just really selling it, and then of course Jack's bass just absolutely thunderous and just so upfront and just very heavy sounding. Like again, John Entwistle, Jack Bruce, those two definitely brought bass to a different level. And then of course Ginger's drumming, just absolutely big sounding, and just how he's going all over the kit and stuff like that, just really laying it down. I'll go more in depth when we do that episode, but
You've heard the album before?
I did hear it, getting ready for the episode we were going to do.
Yeah,
but
I won't ask you what you think about it, but I will say to the viewers who are watching this, there is a song, or I gotta emphasize, song on the track called "Press Rat and Wolf Hog."
yeah,
Which is
and that's Ginger once again.
Press Rat and Wolf Hog closed down their shop, but they didn't want to because it was all they had got. And it's not even singing; it's like spoken word you'll hear my thoughts on it when we get to it. But I just wanted to bring that to light.
Yeah. But by this point, by the time they got to Wheels of Fire, the old cracks were starting to show again between Jack and Ginger. They were starting to bicker, and they were also getting tired of of constant touring. And Eric was starting to get sick and tired of Jack and Ginger's BS. So eventually, they were like, "Okay, let's just call it a day. I think we're done." And so they broke up in late '68. But that didn't stop them from doing one more album in '69, aptly titled "Goodbye."
Goodbye.
I mean, just look at them. They're like, "Yep, see you guys, see ya. We're out of here."
Yeah, I've always loved that album cover because they look so happy, even though two of them wanted to kill each other.
Yeah, pretty much. I by the time we're recording this, I have not heard it yet. It's actually bought this recently. That's kind of similar, but all I know is kind of similar to Wheels of Fire. There's like half studio, half live, but only on a single disc this time, not a double.
Yeah, you mind if I give my thoughts on this album?
Yeah, sure.
Thoughts. My biggest problem with that is that you have 3 live cuts and then 3 studio cuts, and it's like, what was the point in doing that? Because it's like I would have rather have more new material from them. Like, in my opinion, they should have just did another double album, but at that point, they were just so done with each other that they were just kind of threw whatever they had and called it a day. I just wanted to briefly say that.
Yeah, but yeah, only 4 albums. They weren't around that long. But again, this definitely propelled these 3 guys even to like even bigger status. Especially for Eric Clapton. Of course, he would have a massive career. Of course, well, before he did his solo career, of course, he had Blind Faith, and then with Ginger Baker again, and then of course Derek and the Dominoes, and then so on and so forth. Of course, Jack and Ginger both hailed as one of the best of their instruments to this day. Very influential, and yeah, still a very influential band. Again, blending blues, psychedelic, and hard, and just kind of made their own sound out of it. So yeah, that's all I'll say for Cream.
I just want to briefly mention how goated the lineup of Blind Faith is. You have Steve Winwood, Eric Clapton, and Ginger Baker. Those 3 people are so good. I mean, Rick Gretsch is a good bass player, but those other 3 members, it's like, oh my gosh, why didn't they make more music together? It would have been, to me, if they would have kept, because I love their first album, Blind Faith, but I feel like if they would have improved more on that album, not the album, but on their sound and made more music, this might sound dramatic, but they could have been my favorite band of all time because they had such a great dynamic. Together, but it's a shame, but I will say one good thing came out of it was that Derek and the Dominoes was formed. And that's another band that they had such big potential of being like one of my favorite bands.
One album or something.
Just one and done for them. I'm like, oh my gosh, what the heck?
Yeah. No, definitely. Oh, thanks, Bryer, for coming on and talking about the music. I really enjoy your takes on everything, and feel like I learned a lot. So
that's good. Yeah, thanks for having me. Again, sorry I couldn't stay for the whole thing again.
Well, we're about done. Anyway.
It's a late video. I would say, don't you just have to do Aerosmith, Jason?
Yeah.
I'm pretty much done with mine as well.
But yeah, check out Bryer's Music Showcase, of course, his channel. Yeah, and so next week, Bryer, do you think you'd be okay with covering Queen? Is that a band you think you could handle?
I have to really, really scrape the bottom of the barrel to find information, but
tell me if you have enough time to research it. But
I'll see what I can do. I think I can squeeze it in.
Okay.
In my busy schedule,
There's an inside joke, but I told Jason earlier, I'm like, I don't know if the CD guy knows the Night at the Opera and the songs on that album, but I said I'll give it to him to do the research on.
Well, if you think you can handle it, you can cover them next week. But anyways.
All right, I'll see what I can do.
Okay. Well, thanks, Bryer.
All right. Have a good night.
Uh, well, yeah, I had one more band I was going to cover briefly. Didn't really have a lot to say about this band, but I thought it fit in. That's Aerosmith, as you mentioned, Aerosmith, because they do have a great blues rock sound to them early on that I think fits in with the blues rock element of the genre that we're talking about here. And they would come in. They formed in this. Well, they formed in 1970 actually in Boston. We got Steve Tyler, of course, the lead vocalist, probably the face of the group, the person you know the most. But you got Joe Perry on guitar. We also got Tom Hamilton, Joey Kramer, and Brad Whitford as well in the band. And Joe Perry's a great guitar player as well. And the whole band plays pretty well. But mostly I know Tyler and Perry are kind of the main two that I know from that band. Obviously, Tyler has incredible voice, really known for his vocals. He hits incredible notes. Interesting character as well. But yeah, they came out of kind of a blues rock style at that period. Their debut album called Aerosmith came out in 1973. Not a great album at all. And Steve Tyler, this is the weirdest thing when I did it. I've worked on a deep dive for him. I haven't done yet on the channel, but I've got the notes ready. So I've listened to all their albums, and this album doesn't sound like Steve Tyler at all. Steve Tyler, for some reason, didn't sing his normal voice. He tried to do something different. And so you listen to the album and you go, this is Aerosmith. It sounds nothing like Aerosmith, except for one song, and that is Dream On, which was a big hit for them. Though it only charted number 59, which I was surprised it wasn't bigger, but it's a big radio hit for them. Kind of the first song that really got them known. Great song, though. It's more of a ballad style song as well, but it gets a little more rocking towards the end. Next album, not that great either, but the third album is where they really start hitting their stride and becoming a really well-known, great rock band, kind of bluesy rock band. And this came out in 1975. It's called Toys in the Attic. That's probably the big one everybody's heard of. Definitely one of their biggest, most known, influential albums that they've done. It went number 11 in the charts. And it has two of their biggest hits. That's the reason why it's such a big album. That is Sweet Emotion, which went number 36 in the charts, and Walk This Way, which went number 10. So that song went top 10 song of that album. But both are big radio hits. I'm not like a huge fan of that album, except for those two songs I think are really great. But obviously, it's a huge hit album. Sold very well for them and pretty much paved the way for them to keep making music because the popularity off of that one. The next album is actually quite good. The fourth album that came out in 1976 called Rocks, I believe, went number 3 in the charts. So did very well. The biggest song on there is Back in the Saddle, was kind of their big hit, which went number 38. But it's a song that I've heard on the radio quite a bit, and you probably heard that one. Again, the Steve Tyler's I'm Back.
Yeah.
The saddle again. Oh, great vocals. I didn't mention Sweet Emotion has incredible guitar playing. And how that intro into Sweet Emotion. And he sings kind of fast. He has a really good fast-paced singing sometimes, like on that. And even Walk This Way, of course, would eventually become like a rock rap song, I believe, later on. But anyways, yeah. Rocks also has a song called Last Child, which went number 21 in the charts. So that was a hit for them as well. But it's overall, I think, a really solid album. I'd recommend that album. Also, Toys in the Attic is a must listen to, I think. It's a big one. But Rocks, I think, is definitely, check that one out. I don't know if it's underrated, but it's a good album for them, or their earlier stuff. Then their fifth album, actually, I think, is actually pretty decent as well. That came out in 1977, called Draw the Line. Went number 11 in the charts. I really like Kings and Queens is my favorite song on that album. I can't say there's a big hit on there, but that's a good song. Draw the Line. Overall, good blues. Like I said, kind of more bluesy rock style. In fact, when I was doing research, they said that they were a Rolling Stones knockoff band or something like that. Someone said that in one of the reviews, which I thought was interesting. I was like, oh, okay. So I can see that they're kind of coming from Rolling Stones was a bluesy rock kind of band in the 60s, and here's Aerosmith, kind of a bluesy rock band in the 70s. So and Steve Tyler is kind of an interesting frontman, just like Mick Jagger. They had kind of an interesting frontman as well, though it didn't sound anything alike, I would say. But I kind of see that. It's kind of interesting that they kind of made that comparison. Um, Anyways, but yeah. But those are the three albums I would say I'd recommend from this early blues rock period. Um, and that's all I would kind of really want to get through, because then you get to the 80s. And I mean, obviously, the big one is Permanent Vacations, other huge album. And that's kind of a comeback album that comes later in the 80s period. And then they kind of go away from the bluesy rock and they go more pop rock, which is actually my favorite part of the band. I love the late 80s into the 90s, even into the 2000s. I actually really like Aerosmith for the more pop rock. Most people don't like that period. They like the more earlier blues rock period, which is this period. And in my opinion, these are probably three best albums of the early period, but that's my opinion on it.
I really like Nine Lives. That was a great
I
album.
like great album. I like that album a lot.
Like, I'll tell you, I'm definitely me and Bryer are definitely the biggest fans of their earlier period.
Yeah.
My top five though, my number 5, Nine Lives. Number 4, Get Your Wings, which is their second album. Number 3, Toys in the Attic. Number 2, Rocks, and number 1, Draw the Line. So my 4 favorite albums are those 4 albums in a row from their second album to Draw the Line. To me, is their peak period. But Nine Lives, I can enjoy that period. I'm not gonna.
That came out in the 90s, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I know other people will hate it. I'm like, I love this album. I don't know why. I just like the sound of it.
This guy says, "What? You don't like Big Ten record?"
10-inch record. That's on the that's on the Toys of the Attic album.
Oh, okay.
Suck on my big 10-inch.
Yeah. Scott says he likes Toys in the Attic, Rocks, Permanent Vacation, Draw the Line. Yeah, I'm kind of like right with you. I'm not big on Toys in the Attic, but it's obviously a big album for them. But the other ones I really quite enjoy.
I love Uncle Salty though. Uncle Salty told me.
Yeah, favorite Aerosmith songs from the 80s. Okay. Yeah. Anyways, that's all I'm going to say about Aerosmith, really, is just that early blues rock. And they have a really good blues rock sound. And Steve Tyler, to me, is one of the great frontmen as far as his singing ability. Is just amazing. I say they're not making. I think they retired basically from doing music. They did the last tour, but I think they even couldn't complete it. But definitely sold a lot of records. Was a big band for the especially 80s period. I feel like 70s into 80s. But anyways, but yeah, that's all I got for that. Nick, anything else you want to mention before we close out?
I just want to mention I love this period of music. I love psychedelic rock, and I love hard rock.
Yeah.
I think we hit the big bands. I do want to briefly say there's a band called Strawberry Alarm Clock.
Okay. Yeah.
I love that album, Incense and Peppermints. That's a must listen to album if you like psychedelic rock. And of course, I must have to also add Simon Garfunkel too. They kind of had a psychedelic album with bookends. With they had like that first side of them kind of experimenting with stuff like Save the Life of My Child. Another like early example of the Moog synthesizer, and of course the Monkees. They kind of dealt into psychedelic stuff too in the mid 60s, like 67 and 68. But yes, Bryer mentioned Pink Floyd.
Pink Floyd, yeah.
I mean, when we talk about psychedelic rock, we have to include Pink Floyd because, I mean, if you heard their first album, it's like super psychedelic.
Yeah.
Like you're like, this isn't time. This isn't another one, another brick in the wall.
Even the Byrds kind of went a little psychedelic after their first 2 albums. They kind of dealt with that as well with Fifth Dimension,
Younger Than Yesterday, and the Notorious Brothers.
Yeah,
those must listen to psychedelic albums.
Yeah, from the Byrds.
Especially Younger Than Yesterday. There's a song called Mind Garden, which pretty much Crosby going off the deep end, which I love that song. I know most people will hate that. I love when he goes, through the slings of arrows of outrageous fortune.
Yeah.
I love that part. I know people are like, what? You like that? That's nonsense. But I'm like, again, I say this a lot. You're talking to the same person who loves After Bathing at Baxter's by Jefferson Airplane. So I like weirder stuff than that. But yeah, this is that's all I gotta say. I love these 2 things we were talking about.
Yeah, 8 Miles is very trippy. 8 Miles High.
Yeah.
definitely. All right, so that's the end of our History of Rock and Roll Part 3, covering psychedelic rock and hard rock and blues rock of kind of late 60s into the 70s period. So I hope anybody watching enjoys kind of learning maybe about this era. I hope you learned something. Hope you enjoyed us talking about some of the great bands of this period. And even, comment in your opinion, what is your favorite kind of bands maybe or albums of this period, all that. Love to hear anybody's thoughts on that. And next time, part 4, we're going to go into glam rock and prog rock. So another interesting period that I know Nick and Bryer definitely are into. Probably more than me, actually. We're getting to a period where I'm not into the music as much, so Nick and Bryer are going to have to carry the load on those. But anyways,
Yeah, like Bowie, Queen. I mean, of course, we all love Queen. It's
yeah.
like we'll have zero problem with, but like Rush, Genesis. Yes, of course. I'd say give Bryer yes, and give me like Genesis and Rush. Those are the two bands I could handle.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah,
get
Rush and Genesis. Don't give me yes because I'm not as knowledgeable as Bryer is.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. But yeah, so we'll get into that. So stay tuned for yes, progressive rock. Yeah, something you like, Scott. So yeah, we'll get into that the next episode. But thanks a lot for everybody watching, and thanks a lot to Nick and Bryer for joining me. Really enjoyed doing these videos and delving into more rock history and the genres. I think is very interesting. But anyway, so besides that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye.
Have a good one.